The flames were already climbing the barn when Caleb Turner made his choice, the one that would either save two lives or end them both in a hail of bullets. Three masked riders sat on horseback in his yard, torches blazing, rifles gleaming under the moon. Behind him, hidden in the shadows of his ranch house, was the Apache woman they'd come to claim. The town wanted her gone. The law turned a blind eye. And Caleb, a widower who'd lived 52 years without breaking a single rule, now stood between hate and the woman he'd chosen to love. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this journey travels. The sun was bleeding out over the Texas scrubland when Caleb Turner first saw her. He'd been checking the fence line along the creek, the same stretch he'd walked every evening for the past 15 years, ever since Margaret died and the silence of the ranch became something he couldn't quite escape. The ritual gave structure to his days. Morning chores, midday repairs, evening rounds, then whiskey on the porch until sleep finally came. Predictable. Safe. Alone. But that evening, something moved in the cattails where nothing should have been. Caleb's hand went instinctively to the rifle slung across his shoulder. Coyotes were common enough, occasionally a mountain lion drifting down from the hills. But this movement was different, deliberate, careful, human. He approached slowly, boots crunching on the dry earth, eyes scanning the tall grass swaying in the wind. That's when he saw the blood. Dark droplets on the pale rocks. A handprint smeared across a willow trunk. And then, half collapsed behind a fallen cottonwood, a woman. She couldn't have been more than 30, though the hard lines of survival made age difficult to read. Her clothes were torn, traditional Apache dress soaked through with creek water and stained with dirt and blood. Long black hair hung in tangles around a face that was equal parts beautiful and fierce, high cheekbones, dark eyes that tracked his every movement despite her obvious exhaustion, lips pressed tight against pain. A deep gash ran along her left arm, poorly bandaged with strips of cloth that had long since soaked through. Her breathing was shallow, rapid. She'd been running hard and long. "Don't move," Caleb said, keeping his voice low and steady. The rifle stayed across his shoulder. No threat, but present. "I'm not going to hurt you." Her eyes narrowed, calculating. She understood English then. Her right hand shifted almost imperceptibly, and Caleb caught the glint of a knife blade pressed against her thigh. "You're on my land," he continued, slowly lowering himself to one knee to appear less threatening. "And you're hurt bad. Whatever you're running from, whatever happened, right now you need help more than you need that knife." "Your land," she said, and her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper, but edged with something sharp. "This land belonged to my people long before men like you drew lines across it and called it yours." Caleb absorbed that without flinching. She wasn't wrong. "Maybe so," he said, "but those lines exist now, and the people who drew them aren't kind to folks they find where they don't think they belong, especially not alone, especially not hurt. I have survived worse than their unkindness." "I don't doubt it," he gestured toward her arm. "But you won't survive that wound without treatment. It's already infected. Another day, maybe two, and you'll be too weak to run anymore." She said nothing, but her grip on the knife didn't loosen. Caleb sighed and settled back on his heels. The sun was nearly gone now, the sky turning from orange to purple, stars beginning to prick through the gathering dark. Soon it would be cold. She was already shivering. "My name's Caleb Turner," he said. "I've lived on this ranch alone for 15 years. Lost my wife to fever, never had children. The nearest neighbor is 6 miles east, and the town, Redemption, is 8 miles north. I don't have friends there anymore, just people I do business with. I pay my debts, keep to myself, and I don't ask questions I don't need answers to." He paused, meeting her suspicious gaze directly. "I'm telling you this so you understand. I'm not part of whatever's hunting you. I'm just a man who stumbled on another human being in bad shape. I've got a house with a spare room, clean water, food and supplies to treat that arm. You can stay until you're strong enough to move on, and I won't ask where you're going or why. That's the offer. Take it or leave it, but decide now before you're too weak to make the choice." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the rustle of wind through the grass and the distant call of a nightbird. Nara, though he didn't know her name yet, studied him with an intensity that felt like it could see straight through skin and bone to whatever truth lived underneath. "Why?" she finally asked. "Why what? Why help me? You know what I am. You know what your people will do if they find out." Caleb considered the question. It was fair. He'd asked himself the same thing in the heartbeat between seeing her and making the offer. The smart choice was to walk away, pretend he'd never seen her. The safe choice was to ride into town and tell the sheriff, let the law handle it, and keep his hands clean. But he'd made safe choices his whole life. Safe choices had given him a comfortable ranch, a respected reputation, and a house full of silence so thick it felt like drowning. "Because," he said slowly, 15 years ago I watched my wife die, and I couldn't do a damn thing to stop it. Every day since, I've wondered if maybe I've gotten too comfortable watching things happen instead of doing something about them. Tonight, I have a chance to do something, so I'm doing it." He stood, brushing dust from his knees. "House is a quarter-mile that way. I'm walking back now. You can follow or not. That's your choice. But if you do follow, I need your word you won't put that knife in my back. You would trust the word of an Apache woman you found bleeding in the grass. I'd trust the word of any person desperate enough to hide in my creek and proud enough to threaten me while doing it." He turned toward the house, then glanced back. "Besides, if you wanted me dead, I'd already be dead. You had plenty of time while I was talking." A ghost of something that might have been humor flickered across her face. "That is true." Caleb started walking. Behind him, he heard nothing for a long moment, just the wind and his own heartbeat. Then, soft as a whisper, the sound of footsteps in the grass. She followed. The ranch house was modest. 2 bedrooms, a main room shown with a stone fireplace, a kitchen that smelled perpetually of coffee and wood smoke. Caleb had built it himself with Margaret's father in the early years of their marriage, when hope still felt like something solid you could build a life on. Now it felt too big for one person and too full of memories. He pushed open the door and lit the oil lamps, warm light spilling across worn furniture and faded rugs. The woman, Nara, she had told him her name during the walk, nothing more, stood in the doorway, eyes scanning the room with the same calculating wariness she'd shown at the creek. "Sit," Caleb said, gesturing to a chair near the fireplace. "I'll get the medical supplies." She didn't sit. Instead, she moved to the window, positioning herself where she could see both the door and Caleb's movements. Smart. He didn't comment on it. From a cabinet in the bedroom, he retrieved the battered wooden box that held bandages, salves, thread, and needle, a bottle of whiskey for disinfecting wounds. Margaret had been meticulous about keeping it stocked. Even after all these years, Caleb maintained the habit, one of many small ways he kept her memory alive. When he returned to the main room, Nara had moved to the fireplace, warming her hands over the flames he'd built before his evening rounds. She watched him set the box on the table. "I'll need to clean that wound," he said. "It's going to hurt." "Everything hurts," she replied. "One more pain changes nothing." Caleb gestured to the chair again, and this time she sat, though her posture remained coiled, ready to move. He pulled another chair close and opened the box, laying out what he'd need. "Give me your arm." She hesitated, then extended her left arm. He unwrapped the makeshift bandages carefully. They'd been applied with skill, he noted, but without proper materials. The gash beneath was ugly, edges inflamed and beginning to fester. Whatever had cut her had been sharp and wielded with intent. "Knife?" he asked. "Bayonet. You fight whoever did this?" "I survived whoever did this. That is all that matters." He cleaned the wound with whiskey first, and though her jaw tightened, she didn't make a sound. Then he worked with careful, practiced hands. Margaret had taught him field medicine in the early years, when the nearest doctor was a 2-day ride away. Some skills you never forgot. As he stitched, he spoke quietly. "I meant what I said earlier. I won't ask your business, but you should know what you're walking into here. Redemption isn't a kind town, especially not to outsiders. They've got a new marshal named Briggs, came from somewhere back east, likes to keep things orderly." He tied off a stitch. To him, orderly means everyone in their place and no mixing between those places. Apache, Mexican, Chinese, doesn't matter. If you're not white and Protestant, you're a problem waiting to happen. "I know men like him," Nara said. "They are everywhere." "I imagine so." Caleb continued stitching. "Point is, if anyone finds out you're here, there'll be trouble. For you, Definitely. Probably for me too. I can handle my own trouble, but you should know what you're bringing into this house. Then why bring me into it at all? He finished the last stitch and sat back, examining his work. I told you already, I'm tired of watching. You are a strange man, Caleb Turner. So I've been told. He applied salve to the wound and wrapped it with fresh bandages. There's a room down the hall, second door. It was my wife's sewing room, but there's a bed in there. You can stay there. I'll bring you food and water. In the morning, we'll figure out the rest. Nara stood slowly, testing her arm. The pain was still there. He could see it in the careful way she moved, but the immediate crisis had passed. She'd heal, given time. I do not have money to pay you, she said. I didn't ask for any. Then I am in your debt. You don't owe me anything. Just get well and move on when you're ready. That's payment enough. She studied him again with that penetrating gaze, and Caleb had the unsettling feeling that she was reading things about him he didn't even know about himself. You loved your wife very much, she said finally. It wasn't a question, but he answered anyway. I did. And you are lonely now. I am. Loneliness is a slow death, Nara said quietly. In my language, we say it is like being a tree with no roots. Still standing, but already dying. Caleb felt something shift in his chest. Some tightness he'd carried so long he'd forgotten it was there. That's about right, he said, voice rough. She nodded once, then moved toward the hallway. At the door, she paused and looked back. Thank you, Caleb Turner, for the medicine and for the choice you made. I will remember it. Then she was gone, leaving him alone in the lamplight with the ghost of kindness he'd almost forgotten how to show. The first week passed in careful silence. Nara stayed mostly in her room, emerging only for meals and to sit by the fire in the evenings. Caleb went about his routines, morning chores, fence repairs, checking the cattle that grazed his modest acreage. He kept her presence secret, taking care to visit town only when necessary and buying extra supplies without explanation. The storekeeper, a thin man named Hoskins with suspicious eyes, had noticed. A lot of food for one person, Hoskins had remarked, tallying up the flour, beans, and dried meat. Winter's coming, Caleb replied evenly. Rather have too much than too little. Winter's 4 months off. Then I'm ahead of schedule. Hoskins had given him a long look but didn't press further. Still, Caleb felt the weight of scrutiny following him down Redemption's dusty main street. Small towns had a way of noticing changes, no matter how small. Back at the ranch, he found Nara sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the hills in shades of gold and crimson. Her arm was healing well. The infection had cleared and she'd regained her strength quickly. Soon she'd be ready to move on. The thought bothered him more than it should have. How's the arm, Chish? He asked, settling into the other chair. Better. You have steady hands. Had a good teacher. He pulled out his tobacco pouch and rolled a cigarette. You'll be able to travel soon. Another week, maybe less. She didn't respond immediately. When she did, her voice was quiet. Where would I go? North, maybe. Canada. I've heard they're less particular about who settles where. Canada is a long way to travel alone. I could give you supplies. A horse, if you need it. You would give me a horse? She turned to look at him, eyebrow raised. I have already taken your food, your medicine, your shelter. Now you offer more? Caleb shrugged. I've got 3 horses. Only need 1. And the supplies I can spare. Still, it is too much. Maybe I'm not giving it to you. Maybe I'm paying a debt. What debt could you possibly owe me? He took a long drag on his cigarette, watching smoke drift into the evening air. The debt of remembering what it feels like to have another person around. I'd forgotten. You reminded me. That's worth a horse. Nara was quiet for a moment. Then, you are a strange man, Caleb Turner. You mentioned that before. It remains true. They sat in companionable silence as the sun disappeared behind the hills and the first stars emerged. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, lonely and wild. I had a husband once, Nara said suddenly, and a daughter. They were killed in a raid 3 years ago. Soldiers came to our camp while the men were hunting. They said we were trespassing on land that had been designated for settlers. We had lived there for generations, but to them we were thieves. Caleb said nothing, just listened. My husband tried to reason with them. He spoke good English, had even worked for white ranchers when times were hard. He thought words could solve what guns had started. She paused, and when she continued, her voice was flat, emotionless, the tone of someone who'd told this story enough times that feeling had worn away. They shot him in front of our daughter. Then they shot her. She was 6 years old. Jesus, Caleb breathed. I ran. I have been running ever since, not from fear, I do not fear death, but from the knowledge that if I die, no one will remember them. No one will say their names or know they existed. So I survive, and I remember, and that is all I have left. She turned to face him fully, and in the lamplight spilling from the house, her eyes were bright with unshed tears she refused to let fall. So when you ask what debt you could owe me, she continued, I tell you this. You owe me nothing. You gave me shelter when I had none, medicine when I was dying, and kindness when the world has shown me only cruelty. Whatever you offer now, I accept not as payment, but as gift. And gifts, unlike debts, require only gratitude. Caleb felt the weight of her words settle over him like a blanket, heavy, warm, binding. 15 years he'd spent in careful isolation, telling himself it was safer, easier, less painful than risking connection again. But loneliness was a slow death. She'd said it herself. What were their names? He asked quietly. Nara's breath caught, just slightly. No one had asked that question in 3 years. My husband was Takoda. It means friend to everyone. He lived up to his name. A sad smile touched her lips. My daughter was Isi, dear. She was fast and graceful and laughed at everything. She would have been 9 years old this spring. Takoda and Isi, Caleb repeated, committing the names to memory. They sound like good people. They were. The best I knew. Then they're remembered now, by both of us. That's something. Nara wiped at her eyes quickly, a gesture so human and vulnerable it made Caleb's chest ache. Thank you, she whispered. They sat together as night deepened around them. Two lonely people who'd found unexpected solace in shared grief. Neither spoke again for a long while. Words weren't necessary. The understanding between them was enough. By the second week, something had shifted. Nara began helping with the ranch work, feeding the chickens, hauling water, mending fence where the wire had come loose. Caleb protested at first, insisting she was still recovering, but she'd fixed him with a flat stare and said, I am Apache. We do not sit idle while others work. So they worked together, falling into an easy rhythm. She was skilled with her hands, quick to learn, and possessed an intuitive understanding of the land that came from generations of living close to it. She showed him which plants could be used for medicine, how to read weather patterns in the behavior of birds, where to find water when the creek ran low. In return, he taught her the peculiarities of ranch life, how to manage cattle, repair tack, operate the mechanical equipment he'd accumulated over the years. She was a quick study, absorbing information with the focused intensity of someone who understood that survival often depended on knowing more than the next person. They talked while they worked, small things at first, then deeper as comfort grew. She told him about her childhood, about learning to hunt and track from her father, about the stories her grandmother had told of a time when her people ranged freely across land that had no borders. He told her about Margaret, about the small kindnesses that had defined their marriage, about the dreams they'd shared of filling the ranch with children and laughter. You would have been a good father, Nara said one afternoon as they repaired a section of the barn roof. Never got the chance to find out. Caleb hammered in a nail, testing its hold. We tried for years, but it never happened. Margaret blamed herself, though the doctor said there was no way to know whose fault it was. Hell, maybe it wasn't anybody's fault. Maybe some things just aren't meant to be. And you accepted that? Just gave up? What else could we do? We had each other. That was enough. Nara was quiet, considering. In my tribe, there is a belief that children are the spirits of ancestors returning to continue the journey. If they do not come, it means the ancestors are not yet ready to return. They have more to learn in the spirit world before coming back to this one. That's a kinder way of thinking about it than I've managed. Perhaps. Or perhaps it is simply another way of accepting what cannot be changed. She picked up another shingle, fitting it into place. But acceptance is not the same as peace. You can accept a thing and still carry the weight of it. You sound like you're speaking from experience. I accept that my husband and daughter are gone. I accept that I could not save them, but I am not at peace with it. I do not know if I ever will be. Caleb met her eyes across the roof, and in that moment he saw the truth of her clearly, the strength that kept her moving forward, and the wound that would never fully heal. He recognized it because he carried the same. Maybe peace isn't the point, he said. Maybe the point is just finding a way to keep going despite the weight. And have you found that way? He thought about it. Before she'd arrived, his answer would have been a clear no. He'd been going through motions, existing but not living. But now? Working on it, he said. She smiled, and it transformed her face from fierce to radiant. Then we are both works in progress. I'll drink to that. He climbed down from the roof and retrieved a canteen, taking a long swallow before passing it to her. Here's to unfinished business. Nara took the canteen and raised it in mock salute. To unfinished business. They worked until sunset, then sat on the porch as they'd taken to doing, watching the day fade into night. These evening conversations had become Caleb's favorite part of the day, a quiet space where two damaged people could exist without pretense or expectation. But he knew it couldn't last. Redemption was a small town with long memories and suspicious minds. Eventually, someone would notice his changed patterns, or a neighbor would stop by unannounced, or simple bad luck would reveal what he'd been hiding. When that happened, the peace they'd built would shatter. He should send her away now, before things got complicated, before people got hurt. But when he looked at her, strong, proud, scarred by loss, but not broken by it, he knew he couldn't. Sending her away would mean returning to the silence, and he'd tasted enough silence to last a lifetime. What are you thinking about? Nara asked, following his gaze across the darkening land. Trouble, he admitted. The kind that's coming whether we want it or not. I can leave. I am strong enough now. I know, but I'm not asking you to. She turned to study him, and he met her gaze steadily. Whatever was building between them, friendship, connection, maybe something deeper, it was worth defending. He'd spent 15 years playing it safe, and safety had brought him nothing but loneliness. Time to try something different. Then I will stay, Nara said, for as long as you will have me. Could be dangerous. I have survived dangerous before. This is different. You'll be fighting my battles, not your own. She smiled, sharp and fierce. Who says they are not the same battle? You chose to help me when no one else would. That makes your fight mine as well. Caleb felt something warm settle in his chest. Gratitude, affection, maybe the first stirrings of something he'd thought died with Margaret. It scared him. It also felt right in a way nothing had for years. All right then, he said. We'll face it together. Together, she agreed. They shook on it, her hand small but calloused and strong in his. And Caleb understood that with that simple gesture, they'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Whatever came next, acceptance or condemnation, peace or violence, they'd meet it side by side. For better or worse, they were bound now. The trouble arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in the form of Marshal Briggs and two deputies. Caleb was in the barn, checking a horse's hoof for stones, when he heard the riders approach. 3 of them, moving with the slow, deliberate pace of men who expected to be obeyed. He straightened, wiping his hands on his pants, and stepped into the sunlight. Briggs sat tall in the saddle, a lean man in his 40s with a marshal's star pinned to his vest and cold blue eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. His deputies flanked him, younger men with the nervous energy of those eager to prove themselves. Caleb Turner? Briggs asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. That's right. What can I do for you, Marshal? We're conducting a search of ranches in the area. There's been reports of an Apache woman seen near Redemption, possibly the same one who escaped from a military patrol 2 weeks back. You seen anyone matching that description? Caleb's heart hammered, but his face remained neutral. Can't say I have. I don't get many visitors out here. Briggs's eyes narrowed slightly. Mind if we take a look around, just to be thorough? It wasn't really a question, and they both knew it. You got a warrant, Marshal? Don't need one for suspected fugitives, but if you're refusing cooperation... Briggs let the threat hang. Caleb weighed his options. Refusing would only make them more suspicious. But if they found Nara, and they would, if they searched thoroughly, things would escalate quickly. I'm not refusing, he said carefully, just asking about procedure. You're welcome to look around, though I'm telling you now you won't find what you're looking for. We'll see about that. Briggs dismounted, gesturing for his deputies to do the same. Boys, check the barn and outbuildings. I'll take the house. Caleb's stomach dropped. Nara was in the house. He'd left her there less than an hour ago, preparing lunch. He told her to stay out of sight when visitors came, but there was nowhere to hide from a determined search. He followed Briggs to the house, mind racing through possibilities. Maybe she'd heard them coming and slipped out the back. Maybe she'd found a hiding spot he didn't know about. Maybe... The door swung open before Briggs could knock. Nara stood in the doorway, dressed in one of Margaret's old dresses that Caleb had given her, hair pulled back simply, expression calm and composed. She looked nothing like a fugitive, just a woman interrupted while doing household chores. Briggs stopped, clearly surprised. Ma'am? Marshall, Nara replied, her English carrying only the faintest accent. Can I help you? I'm looking for Caleb Turner. He's right behind you. She glanced past Briggs to Caleb, giving him the slightest nod. Trust me, that nod said. Is there trouble, Caleb? The use of his first name, the casual familiarity, it painted a picture of domestic normalcy that threw Briggs off balance. Caleb could see the marshal reassessing, trying to reconcile this composed woman with the dangerous fugitive he'd been hunting. No trouble, Caleb said, moving to stand beside her. Marshall's just conducting a search. Something about an Apache woman in the area. Oh? Nara's eyebrows rose. How concerning. Should we be worried? Briggs studied her carefully. You're not from around here, ma'am. Mind telling me your name? Naravella, she said without hesitation. I'm originally from Arizona territory, but I've been working in El Paso the past few years. I came to Redemption last month looking for domestic work, and was fortunate enough that Mr. Turner needed a housekeeper. It was a lie, of course, but delivered with such confidence that Briggs couldn't immediately dismiss it. Still, his eyes remained suspicious. Vela's a Spanish name, he observed. My mother was Mexican. My father was white, a surveyor from back east. I take after my mother in appearance, but I assure you, Marshal, I'm a citizen and I have papers. She smiled politely. Would you like to see them? That won't be necessary right now, but I will need to verify your story with El Paso authorities. Of course, I understand completely. Nara stepped aside, gesturing into the house. Would you like to come in? I just made coffee. Briggs hesitated. The offer of coffee, the calm demeanor, the plausible story, it all worked against his suspicions. But Caleb could see he wasn't entirely convinced. I'll take you up on that, Briggs said finally, stepping into the house. Nara moved to the stove with practiced ease, pouring coffee into cups while Briggs looked around. The house was neat, lived in, showing no signs of anything unusual. Through the window, Caleb could see the deputies searching the barn, going through hay bales and checking stalls. You've been here a month, you said? Briggs asked, accepting the coffee Nara offered. About that, yes. Funny, I don't recall seeing you in town. I tend to keep to myself, Mr. Turner does the shopping when he goes for supplies. She glanced at Caleb. I prefer the quiet out here. Cities make me nervous. Cities? Briggs took a sip of coffee. El Paso's not much of a city. Compared to this, it is. The conversation continued in that vein, Briggs probing, Nara deflecting with just enough detail to seem truthful without inviting deeper investigation. Caleb watched the dance, impressed despite his anxiety. She was good at this, adapting to threats with the same survival instinct that had kept her alive this long. Finally, the deputies returned, shaking their heads. Nothing, Marshal. Place is clean. Briggs set down his coffee cup, disappointment flickering across his face. All right then. Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Turner. He touched his hat to Nara. Ma'am, I'll be in touch once I hear back from El Paso. I'll look forward to it, Nara said with another polite smile. They watched from the porch as the three riders left, dust rising behind their horses. Neither spoke until the lawmen were out of sight. That was too close, Caleb breathed. But it worked. Nara's composure cracked slightly, revealing the tension beneath. For now. They'll check your story. When they find out there's no record of a Naravella in El Paso. I know, which means we have perhaps a week, maybe 2, before they return. She turned to face him. I should leave, Caleb. Tonight, before this gets worse. No. No? You heard me. You're not running again. He met her eyes, resolve hardening. They want to make you disappear, make all of your people disappear by treating you like you don't belong anywhere, like you have no right to exist where you choose. I won't be part of that. You are risking everything. For what? A reputation in a town that barely tolerates me? Property I'll eventually die and leave to no one? He shook his head. I've spent 15 years protecting things that don't matter. Maybe it's time I protected something that does. Nara's eyes glistened. You are a fool, Caleb Turner. Probably, but I'm a fool who's made up his mind. She stepped forward suddenly and kissed him, brief, fierce, tasting of coffee and desperation and gratitude. When she pulled back, they were both breathing hard. Then we make a plan, she said, because I will not let you sacrifice yourself for my sake. If we do this, we do it smart. Agreed. Caleb's mind was already working. We'll need help. People in town who might be sympathetic or at least willing to look the other way. I'll talk to a few folks I trust. Who can you trust? It was a good question. He ran through the list of redemption citizens in his mind. The storekeeper who'd already shown suspicion, the banker who cared only about money, the preacher who preached acceptance on Sunday and practiced judgment every other day of the week. But there were others. Sarah Chen, who ran the laundry and knew what it meant to be an outsider. Old Tom Hastings, who'd fought in the war and come back hating everything the conflict had stood for. Maybe even Doc Morrison, who'd taken an oath to help people regardless of who they were. A few, Caleb said. Not many, but a few. It's a start. And if it is not enough? He thought about that. About the worst-case scenario where the town rose against them, where violence became inevitable, where the choice came down to surrender or fight. Then we fight, he said simply. Together. Nara nodded, that fierce smile returning. Together. They went inside to make their plans, neither acknowledging the line they'd just crossed. Caleb Turner, who'd spent 15 years avoiding conflict, was now actively courting it, and Nara Vela, who'd spent 3 years running, was choosing to stand. The storm was building on the horizon, but for the first time in longer than either could remember, they weren't facing it alone. That would have to be enough. The next morning, Caleb rode into Redemption alone. The town looked the same as it always did, a single dusty street lined with weathered buildings, horses tied to hitching posts, the general hum of commerce and conversation drifting through the air. But Caleb felt different. He'd crossed a threshold the night before, and now every familiar face carried the weight of potential judgment. He tied his horse outside the medical office and pushed through the door. Doc Morrison sat at his desk, spectacles perched on his nose, reading from a thick medical journal. He looked up as Caleb entered, surprise flickering across his weathered face. Caleb Turner, twice in 1 month. Should I be worried about your health? My health's fine, Doc. Caleb closed the door behind him and lowered his voice. I need to talk to you about something that stays between us. Morrison's expression shifted, curiosity replacing surprise. He set down the journal and gestured to a chair. I'm bound by oath to keep confidence. Sit. Caleb sat, choosing his words carefully. Morrison was a good man, one of the few in Redemption who treated everyone equally, regardless of where they came from or what they looked like. But even good men had limits. I've got someone staying at my ranch, Caleb began. Someone who needs help. And before you ask, yes, it's the woman Briggs is looking for. Morrison's eyebrows rose, but he didn't interrupt. She's not a criminal, Doc. She's a widow who lost her family to violence and has been running ever since. She was wounded when I found her, starving, half dead by my creek. I brought her in, patched her up, and now she's recovering. And Briggs already knows about this? Morrison asked. He searched my place yesterday. Nara, that's her name, told him she was my housekeeper, gave him a false background. He believed it, or at least couldn't prove otherwise. But he's checking her story, and when it doesn't hold up, he'll be back. So why are you telling me this? Because when the truth comes out, there's going to be trouble, the kind that might need a doctor. Caleb leaned forward. I'm not asking you to hide her or lie for her. I'm just asking that if someone gets hurt, anyone, you'll treat them. No questions, no reports to Briggs. Morrison was quiet for a long moment, studying Caleb with the same careful attention he gave to diagnosing illness. You know what you're asking could cost me my practice. The town council won't look kindly on a doctor who helps fugitives. I know, and if you say no, I'll understand. But you're the only person in this town I trust to do the right thing regardless of the consequences. The right thing. Morrison huffed a bitter laugh. You assume I know what that is. You took an oath, didn't you? To help people who need help? I did. But oaths get complicated when politics enter the picture. Then forget politics. Just tell me, if a woman showed up at your door bleeding and scared, would you turn her away because of the color of her skin? Morrison's jaw tightened. You know damn well I wouldn't. Then that's all I'm asking. Caleb stood. Help if help is needed. That's it. The doctor was quiet again, warring with himself. Finally, he sighed. All right, but Caleb, you need to understand what you're starting here. Redemption isn't ready for this kind of challenge to how things are. You push too hard, people will push back harder. Let them push. I'm done stepping aside. Morrison shook his head, something like admiration mixing with concern in his expression. You've changed, Turner. Used to be you'd cross the street to avoid confrontation. Used to be a lot of things. Not anymore. Caleb left the medical office feeling both lighter and heavier. He'd secured one ally, but Morrison's warning echoed in his mind. The town wasn't ready, but then neither was he. They'd learned together. His next stop was the laundry. Sarah Chen worked behind clouds of steam, her sleeves rolled up, hair tied back with a practical scarf. She was small, barely 5 feet tall, but she carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who'd survived worse than small-town prejudice. Mr. Turner, she said, looking up from a washboard, your shirts aren't due until Friday. I'm not here about shirts, Mrs. Chen. I need a favor. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Sarah Chen hadn't survived 2 decades in redemption by being naive. What kind of favor? Caleb glanced around. The laundry was empty except for them, but he lowered his voice anyway. I've got someone at my ranch who might need a place to hide if things get bad. Someone the law's looking for, but who doesn't deserve what they'll get if they're caught. Sarah's hand stilled in the soapy water. You're talking about the Apache woman. Word traveled fast. How did you... Briggs came through here yesterday asking questions. Told me to report any suspicious activity. She pulled her hands from the water, drying them on her apron. Why would I help her? Because you know what it's like to be hunted for existing in the wrong place. Sarah's expression hardened. Don't presume to know what I've experienced, Mr. Turner. You're right. I'm sorry. Caleb took a breath. But I've seen how this town treats you. The whispers, the casual cruelty, the way people act like you're invisible unless they need their clothes cleaned. You've built a life here despite all that. Nara's just trying to do the same. And you think hiding her in my laundry will make things better for either of us? I think having options is better than having none. If it comes to it, if my ranch isn't safe anymore, I wanted to know if there was somewhere else. That's all. Sarah studied him with dark, calculating eyes. She'd learned long ago to weigh risk against reward, to protect herself first because no one else would. I can't promise anything, she said finally. But if things get desperate, send word. I'll see what I can do. It wasn't a commitment, but it was something. Caleb nodded his thanks and turned to leave. Mr. Turner? He looked back. Be careful. Men like Briggs don't forgive challenges to their authority, and this town doesn't forgive those who stand with outsiders. I know, but I'm tired of asking for forgiveness instead of earning it. Sarah's expression softened slightly. Then you're braver than most. Or more foolish. Time will tell which. Outside, the sun had climbed higher, heat beginning to shimmer off the packed dirt street. Caleb untied his horse, considering his next move. He'd secured 2 potential allies, but Morrison was right. It wouldn't be enough. Not against the full weight of the town's suspicion. He was mounting up when a voice called out behind him. Caleb Turner, heard you've been making interesting friends lately. Caleb turned. Samuel Grant stood in the shadow of the general store, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Grant owned the largest ranch in the territory, 3 times the size of Caleb's spread, and carried the influence that came with wealth. He was also one of the few men in town Caleb had considered a friend, back before isolation became Caleb's preferred state. Sam, Caleb said carefully, didn't know you were in town. Came to settle some accounts with the bank. Grant stepped into the sunlight, and Caleb could see the questions in his eyes. Ran into Briggs this morning. He mentioned searching your place yesterday. Found it interesting you've taken on a housekeeper. Here it was. The first test of how his choices would be received by someone who mattered in Redemption's social hierarchy. Caleb chose honesty over deflection. I needed help around the ranch. She needed work. Seemed like a fair arrangement. That's one way of looking at it. Grant moved closer, lowering his voice. Another way is that you're harboring the woman half the territory's looking for, and you're doing it in plain sight with a story so thin a child could see through it. Caleb's hand tightened on the reins. If you're here to threaten me, Sam, I'm here to understand what the hell you think you're doing, Grant interrupted. We've known each other 15 years, Caleb. You're the most cautious man I've ever met. You check fence lines 3 times before declaring them secure. And now you're taking in fugitives and lying to marshals? What changed? It was a fair question. Caleb considered his answer carefully. I got tired, he said finally. Tired of the loneliness, tired of the silence, tired of being so damn careful all the time that I forgot what it felt like to take a risk for something that mattered. And she matters? This woman you barely know? She matters because she reminded me that there are things worth fighting for beyond comfort and safety. Things like dignity and choice, and the right to exist without constantly looking over your shoulder. Grant absorbed this, his expression thoughtful. You know what you're risking. Your reputation, your property, possibly your life. For what? A woman who will probably leave the moment things get too dangerous? Maybe she will, or maybe she won't. Either way, I'll know I stood for something instead of just standing by. Caleb met Grant's eyes steadily. I'm not asking you to approve, Sam. I'm not even asking you to help. I'm just asking you not to stand in the way. Grant was quiet, and in that silence, Caleb could almost see the calculations running through his friend's mind. Supporting Caleb meant risking Grant's own standing in the community, but opposing him meant abandoning a friendship built over years of mutual respect. Finally, Grant sighed. You're a damn fool, Turner. So I've been told. But you're a sincere damn fool, which is more than I can say for most men. He extended his hand. I won't stand in your way, and if things get truly bad, you've got a place at my ranch. Both of you. Caleb shook his hand, relief flooding through him. Thank you, Sam. Don't thank me yet. I'm not promising to fight your battles, just offering sanctuary if you need it. Beyond that, you're on your own. That's more than I expected. Grant released his hand and stepped back. One more thing. Briggs is planning something. I heard him talking to Mayor Whitfield this morning. Couldn't make out details, but the tone was clear. He's not letting this go. I didn't think he would. Then you better be ready for whatever comes next, because when Briggs moves, he moves hard. With that warning hanging in the air, Grant tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Caleb alone with his thoughts and the growing certainty that the fragile peace couldn't last much longer. He rode back to the ranch slowly, cataloging what he'd learned. Morrison would help medically. Sarah Chen might provide temporary shelter. Grant offered sanctuary as a last resort. It was a thin network, barely enough to qualify as support, but it was more than he'd had when the day started. The question was whether it would be enough. Nara was waiting on the porch when he arrived, eyes scanning him for signs of trouble. How did it go? Mixed, Caleb said, dismounting and tying his horse. Got a few people willing to help, or at least not actively oppose us. But Grant heard Briggs is planning something. Planning what? Don't know yet. But we should prepare for the worst. Nara nodded, her expression grim but unsurprised. Then we fortify. Make the ranch defensible. Over the next week, they worked with focused intensity. Caleb taught Nara to shoot, setting up targets by the creek and drilling her until she could hit them consistently. She was a natural, her hunting instincts translating well to firearms. In return, she showed him defensive tactics, how to use terrain for advantage, how to spot ambush points, how to move quietly when stealth mattered more than speed. They reinforced the house's weak points, barring windows on the ground floor and creating clear sight lines from inside. Caleb moved his ammunition into the house and made sure weapons were distributed strategically. A rifle above the fireplace, a pistol in the kitchen, another in the bedroom. You really think it will come to this? Nara asked one evening as they worked by lamplight checking rifle mechanisms. I hope not, but hope's not a strategy. No, she agreed, it is not. They worked in silence for a while, the kind of comfortable quiet that had become familiar between them. But underneath the calm, tension simmered, the awareness that each day brought them closer to confrontation. Tell me about your wife, Nara said suddenly. What was she like? Caleb looked up, surprised by the question. Margaret? She was steady. The kind of person who made you feel like everything would be okay even when it clearly wouldn't. She could see the good in just about anyone, even when they didn't deserve it. She sounds kind. She was, too kind sometimes. I used to worry people would take advantage of her generosity. He smiled sadly. She'd just laugh and say kindness wasn't something you rationed. Either you had it or you didn't, and if you had it, you should use it. I think I would have liked her. She would have liked you too. Would have lectured me about taking so long to help you, probably. Caleb set down the rifle he'd been cleaning. What about your husband? Dakota, what was he like? Nara's hand stilled. She rarely spoke about her family in detail. The grief was still too raw, but something in Caleb's openness invited reciprocation. He was patient, she said quietly. Endlessly patient. I have a temper, always have, and he would just wait it out like a storm. Never argued back, never got defensive. Just listened until I'd said everything I needed to say, then he'd ask, Are you finished? And I'd realize how ridiculous I'd been, and we'd both laugh. Sounds like a good man. He was. The best I knew. She picked up the rifle again, resuming her work. Sometimes I forget what his voice sounded like. Little details fade, you know. I remember his laugh, but not the exact sound of it. I remember his hands, but not quite how they felt. It scares me. The idea that one day I'll forget him completely. You won't, Caleb said firmly. Not completely. The important parts stay. The way they made you feel, the lessons they taught you, the person you became because they were in your life. That doesn't fade. How can you be sure? Because Margaret died 15 years ago, and I still feel her presence in this house. Still hear her voice sometimes when I'm making decisions, telling me whether I'm being smart or stubborn. Memory isn't just what we recall, it's what we carry forward. Nara smiled, blinking back tears. You are wise, Caleb Turner, for a fool. I'll take that as a compliment. They returned to their work, but the conversation had shifted something between them. The loss they shared wasn't just a common wound anymore. It was a bridge connecting past grief to present hope. Both had loved deeply, lost profoundly, and somehow found the courage to risk caring again. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. 3 days later, the town council issued a summons. Caleb found it nailed to his fence post one morning, an official notice demanding his appearance at a public meeting to address concerns regarding moral character and civic responsibility. The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday at the town hall. It's a trap, Nara said when he showed her the notice. They want you in town, away from the ranch, so they can come here while you're gone. Maybe. But if I don't go, they'll use it as evidence I'm defying legal authority. Either way, they win. Then we both go. Make it clear I'm not hiding, Caleb shook his head. That's exactly what they want, to get you into town where Briggs can arrest you publicly. No, I go alone. You stay here, armed and ready. If anyone comes, you know what to do. Run, she said flatly. That is what you mean. Run and hide like I have been doing for 3 years. I mean survive. There's no shame in that. There is shame in abandoning you to face judgment alone for choices we made together. Nara, no. She stepped close, eyes blazing with the fierce pride he'd come to recognize and admire. You told me we face this together. That means both of us, not just you playing hero while I hide. If you go to that meeting, I go with you. We stand side by side, or we don't stand at all. Caleb wanted to argue, to insist on protecting her even at the cost of her pride, but he recognized that same stubborn determination he'd seen by the creek that first night, the refusal to be diminished or made helpless by circumstance. She was right. They'd made this choice together. They should face the consequences the same way. All right, he said, together. Tuesday arrived with the weight of inevitability. They dressed carefully, Caleb in his best suit, rarely worn since Margaret's funeral, and Nara in one of Margaret's dresses that she'd altered to fit. She looked respectable, composed. Nothing like the wounded fugitive from weeks ago, but respectability wouldn't save them. They both knew it. The ride to redemption was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the town, Caleb noticed people stopping to stare, conversations dying as they passed. Word had spread. Everyone knew who Nasha was now, or at least suspected. The pretense of her being a simple housekeeper had evaporated. The town hall was packed, every seat filled, people standing along the walls, the air thick with heat and tension and judgment barely restrained. Mayor Whitfield sat at a table up front, flanked by council members Caleb recognized, the banker, the preacher, the owner of the saloon, and Marshal Briggs, who watched with cold satisfaction as Caleb and Nara entered. "Mr. Turner," Whitfield said, his voice carrying across the sudden silence. "Thank you for joining us. And Miss Vela, was it?" "That is correct," Nara replied, her voice steady. "Please, have a seat." There were 2 chairs facing the council table, positioned to make those sitting in them feel small and exposed. Caleb and Nara sat, maintaining their composure despite the weight of hostile eyes pressing down on them. Whitfield shuffled papers, drawing out the moment. Finally, he looked up. "Mr. Turner, you've been a resident of this community for over 20 years. In that time, you've maintained a reputation as an honest, hard-working man, which is why this council finds it so troubling to hear reports that you've been harboring a fugitive from military custody." "I've been providing shelter to a woman in need," Caleb corrected. "There's a difference." "Is there? Marshal Briggs, perhaps you could clarify the situation." Briggs stood, pulling out his own set of papers. 2 weeks ago, a military patrol reported the escape of an Apache woman named Nara during transport to a reservation in Oklahoma Territory. The woman was described as approximately 30 years old, 5'5", black hair, distinctive scar on her left forearm. He paused, looking directly at Nara. "Miss Vela, would you mind showing us your left arm?" Nara met his gaze without flinching. Slowly, deliberately, she rolled up her sleeve, revealing the long scar Caleb had stitched weeks ago. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "That could be from anything," Caleb said. "Lots of people have scars." Indeed, but when combined with Miss Vela's complete lack of verifiable history, her sudden appearance in this territory, and your own changed behavior, it paints a rather clear picture. Briggs smiled coldly. "She's the escaped prisoner, Mr. Turner. We both know it. This charade of her being your housekeeper fools no one." "Even if she is," Caleb said, keeping his voice level, "she's committed no crime. Being Apache isn't against the law." "Escaping military custody is," Briggs countered, "as is aiding and abetting that escape." "I didn't help her escape. I found her injured on my property and provided medical assistance. That's not a crime either. It's basic human decency." "Decency." Reverend Matthews leaned forward, his thin face pinched with disapproval. "Mr. Turner, this woman represents a threat to the moral fabric of our community. Her people are heathens, savages who refuse to accept civilization and the word of a—" "Careful, Reverend," Caleb interrupted. "You're about to say something that'll make you look a lot less righteous than you think you are." Matthew's face flushed. "How dare you?" "Gentlemen," Whitfield cut in, "this isn't about religion or race. It's about law and order. Marshal Briggs has identified Miss Vela as an escaped prisoner. He has the authority to take her into custody. The question before this council is whether we, as a community, support that action." "And what about me?" Caleb asked. "Am I being charged with something?" "That depends on your cooperation," Briggs said. "If you turn her over now, acknowledge that you were deceived about her identity, we can consider the matter of your involvement closed. But if you continue to obstruct justice—" He let the threat hang. Caleb looked at Nara. Her face was composed, but he could see the tension in her jaw, the way her hands gripped the arms of the chair. She was preparing for the worst, had probably expected this from the moment they decided to come. But she hadn't run. She'd stood beside him, facing judgment with the same fierce dignity she brought to everything. He turned back to the council. "No," he said simply. Whitfield blinked. "No?" "No, I won't turn her over. No, I wasn't deceived. I knew who she was from the beginning. I knew the military was looking for her, knew bringing her to my ranch would cause exactly this kind of trouble. And I did it anyway, because it was the right thing to do. The room erupted. Voices rose in shock, anger, some few in unexpected support. Whitfield hammered his gavel, calling for order. Mr. Turner, you realize what you're admitting to? I do. I'm admitting that I chose human decency over blind obedience. I'm admitting that when I found a wounded woman who needed help, I helped her. And I'd do it again. He stood, facing the crowd. Naravela isn't a criminal. She's a widow whose family was murdered by soldiers who decided her people didn't belong on land they'd lived on for generations. She's been running for 3 years, not because she broke any law, but because men with power decided her existence was inconvenient. That's enough, Turner, Briggs warned. But Caleb wasn't finished. You want to arrest her? Fine. But you'll have to arrest me too, because I'm not letting you take her without a fight. And before you do, I want everyone in this room to look at her, really look, and ask yourselves if this is who we are. Is this the kind of community we want to be? One that punishes kindness and turns away people in need because they don't look like us or worship like us. He pointed at the preacher. You talk about morality, Reverend, but which is more moral, sheltering the vulnerable or hunting them down? You tell me, because I'd like to know how you reconcile your sermons about compassion with what's happening here. Matthews sputtered, unable to form a coherent response. Caleb turned to the crowd. Some of you know me. You've bought cattle from me, shared drinks with me, mourned with me when Margaret died. I've been part of this community for 20 years. I've never caused trouble, never broken the law, never asked for anything I didn't earn. I'm asking now, not for me, for her, for the chance to prove that we're better than our worst instincts. Silence fell over the hall. Caleb could see faces struggling with the challenge he'd laid before them. People who'd never questioned the way things were, now forced to confront whether those ways were right. Then a voice from the back called out, "She's Apache! Her people killed settlers!" "And settlers killed her people," Nara said, standing beside Caleb. Her voice was clear, strong, carrying to every corner of the room. "You want to talk about violence? My husband was shot for trying to talk. My daughter was 6 years old when they murdered her. I have committed no crime except surviving what your soldiers did to my family. If that makes me guilty in your eyes, then your justice is worthless." The room erupted again, voices clashing, some supporting, most condemning. Briggs moved toward Nara, hand on his pistol. "That's enough. Naravela, you're under arrest for—" "No." Doc Morrison stood from where he'd been sitting near the back. "Not without due process, she's not." Briggs spun. "Doc, this doesn't concern you. It concerns everyone in this room. You can't just arrest people without charges, without a trial. That's not law. That's tyranny. She's a fugitive from military custody. Then let the military arrest her. Last I checked, you're a town marshal, not a soldier. Your jurisdiction covers redemption, not federal military matters." Briggs's face darkened. "You're splitting hairs. I'm citing the law, which is supposed to be your job." Morrison looked around the room. Anyone else here uncomfortable with the idea of our marshal overstepping his authority? A few hands rose. Not many, but enough to create doubt. Whitfield hammered his gavel again. "This meeting is getting out of hand. We'll table the matter for now and reconvene when cooler heads can prevail. Marshal, stand down. Mr. Turner, Miss Vela, you're free to go, for now. But this isn't over." Briggs looked like he wanted to argue, but Whitfield's glare stopped him. Slowly, grudgingly, he stepped back. Caleb took Nara's arm, and together they walked through the hostile crowd toward the exit. People parted reluctantly, some muttering curses, others just staring with undisguised hate. Outside, the sunlight felt harsh after the oppressive atmosphere of the hall. Caleb's hands were shaking, adrenaline finally catching up with him. "That was either very brave or very stupid," Morrison said, emerging behind them. "Probably both," Caleb admitted. "Definitely both," Morrison corrected. "But for what it's worth, I think you did the right thing. Not sure it'll matter in the end, but at least you stood up. Thank you for speaking out in there." "Don't thank me yet. I just bought you time, not safety. Briggs won't let this go, and neither will most of the town." Morrison glanced at Nara. "You should leave, both of you, tonight, before things escalate." We're not running, Nara said. Then you're fools. That seems to be the consensus, Caleb said dryly, but we appreciate the concern. Morrison shook his head and walked away, leaving them standing in the street. Sarah Chen approached from the laundry, moving quickly. That was quite a speech, she said quietly. Stupid, but impressive. You here to tell us to run too? Caleb asked. No, I'm here to tell you the offer still stands. You need a place to hide. You come to me. But Mr. Turner? After what just happened in there, hiding might be your only option. You've made enemies today, powerful ones. I know, but I'd rather have enemies I can see than allies who abandon me when things get hard. Sarah smiled faintly. Then you're braver than I am. Be careful going home. And watch your back. She disappeared into the laundry, leaving Caleb and Nara alone on the street. Around them, Redemption watched with hostile eyes, a town that had made its position clear. They rode home in silence, the weight of what had happened settling over them like a shroud. Caleb knew they'd crossed a point of no return. The town council might have backed down today, but it was temporary. A reprieve, not a pardon. The storm was coming, and when it hit, they'd face it together or not at all. That night, as they sat on the porch, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky, Nara spoke softly. Thank you for what you said in there. Just told the truth. No, you told them who you are. That takes courage most people don't have. Caleb reached over and took her hand. She laced her fingers through his, and they sat like that in comfortable silence. Two people who'd found unexpected connection in the midst of chaos. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. And that would have to be enough. The retaliation came faster than expected. 2 days after the town hall meeting, Caleb rode out to check his cattle and found them scattered across his neighbor's property, fences cut clean through in 3 places. It was deliberate, methodical, not the work of weather or wandering animals, but of men with wire cutters and an agenda. He spent the morning rounding up the herd and repairing the damage, Nara working beside him without complaint. By afternoon, they'd restored most of what had been destroyed, but the message was clear. The town wasn't going to confront them directly. Not yet. They'd apply pressure slowly, make life difficult enough that leaving seemed like the only rational choice. They think we will break, Nara said, hammering a fence post into rocky ground. Give up and disappear. They don't know us very well then. Caleb tested the post's stability, satisfied when it held firm. Though I won't lie, this is going to get worse before it gets better. I know. I have seen this pattern before. First the small cruelties, then the larger ones, until finally they come with torches and guns and tell themselves they had no choice. The accuracy of her prediction made Caleb's stomach tighten. He'd seen the same escalation in towns during the war, communities turning on themselves, neighbor against neighbor, violence justified by fear dressed up as righteousness. We could still leave, he said quietly. Take what we can carry and head north like you originally planned. Start over somewhere they don't know us. Nara stopped working and looked at him directly. Is that what you want? No, but I want you safe more than I want to be right. And I want to stop running more than I want to be safe. She drove the hammer down one last time, the post sinking deep into the earth. My whole life I have been forced to move because men with power decided I did not belong. First the soldiers, then the reservation agents, then the bounty hunters and marshals. Always running, always hiding, never allowed to simply exist in peace. She straightened, wiping sweat from her forehead. I am tired, Caleb. Tired of moving, tired of fear, tired of letting other people's hate dictate where I can live and who I can be. If I run now, I will run forever. So I choose to stand. Caleb felt something swell in his chest. Pride, fear, love, all tangled together in a knot he couldn't unravel. Then we stand together. Together, she agreed, and sealed it with a kiss that tasted of dust and determination. That evening, Samuel Grant arrived at the ranch unannounced. Caleb saw him coming from a distance and tensed, hand instinctively moving toward the rifle by the door. But Grant rode alone, and when he dismounted, his expression was troubled rather than hostile. Sam, Caleb greeted him carefully. Didn't expect to see you out here. Didn't expect to be here, Grant replied. But I figured I owed you a warning. Mind if I come in? They settled in the main room, Nara bringing coffee while Grant collected his thoughts. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and serious. Town's planning something. I don't know exactly what, but I heard Briggs and Whitfield talking at the saloon last night. They're organizing what they're calling a citizens committee, supposedly to address threats to community safety. Meaning us, Caleb said. Meaning you. They're being careful about it, keeping things just legal enough that they can claim proper authority. But make no mistake, this is a lynch mob dressed up in official language. Nara's hand tightened around her coffee cup. When? Don't know. Could be days, could be weeks. They're building consensus first, making sure enough people are on board that when they move, no one will object. Grant looked between them. I meant what I said before. You're welcome at my ranch. Both of you. I've got enough hands that Briggs would think twice before trying anything on my property. We appreciate that, Caleb said. But accepting would just move the target. They'd come for us eventually, and when they did, you'd be caught in the middle. Let me worry about that. No. Caleb's voice was firm. You've already risked enough by offering. I won't drag you down with us. Grant sighed, frustration evident. You're a stubborn man, Turner. Learned from the best, Caleb replied with a faint smile. You taught me that being right matters more than being comfortable. I'm just applying the lesson. I taught you to pick battles you could win. Who says I can't win this one? Common sense. Mathematics. The fact that you're two people against an entire town. Grant leaned forward. I admire what you're doing, Caleb. Truly. But admiration doesn't stop bullets or put out fires. You need to think practically about this. I have been, Caleb said. Which is why I've been preparing. We've fortified the house, stockpiled supplies, mapped out escape routes if things go completely wrong. We're not going into this blind. And if they come with 20 men? 30? What then? Then we make them work for it, Nara interjected. Make them face what they are doing instead of hiding behind committees and official language. If they want to destroy us, they will have to do it in the open, where everyone can see their shame. Grant looked at her with something approaching respect. You're as stubborn as he is. We are well matched. That's what worries me. Grant stood, preparing to leave. All right, I can see you've made up your minds, but the offer stands. Any time, day or night, you need shelter, you ride to my place. I'll make sure my hands know to let you through. Caleb walked him to the door. Thank you, Sam, for the warning and the friendship. Just don't make me regret it by getting yourself killed. Grant mounted his horse, then paused. One more thing. There are others in town who feel like I do. Not many, but a few. If things escalate, you might have more support than you think. Don't assume you're completely alone. With that cryptic encouragement, he rode off into the gathering darkness, leaving Caleb and Nara to contemplate the storm building on the horizon. The next week passed in uneasy quiet. No more fences were cut, no more cattle scattered. But the silence felt ominous rather than peaceful. The stillness before thunder, when the air grew heavy and tight with approaching violence. Caleb made trips to town only when absolutely necessary, and when he did, he felt the weight of hostile stares tracking his movements. Conversations stopped when he entered the general store. People crossed the street to avoid passing too close. Even Hoskins, who'd always been professionally cordial, if not friendly, served him with barely concealed contempt. Surprised you still show your face here, Hoskins muttered while tallying up Caleb's supplies. I pay in cash and don't cause trouble, Caleb replied evenly. That should be enough. Used to be. But you've changed the equation by bringing that woman into civilized company. Civilized company, Caleb repeated, looking around the store at its worn shelves and dusty inventory. Is that what we're calling redemption now? Because from where I stand, civilization requires more than just white skin and church attendance. Hoskins' face flushed. You want to defend savages? That's your business. But don't expect the rest of us to go along with it. I don't expect anything from you except basic human decency. Apparently, that's too much to ask. He paid for his supplies and left, aware of Hoskins' glare burning into his back. Outside, he loaded the goods onto his wagon and was preparing to leave when Doc Morrison appeared at his elbow. Walk with me, Morrison said quietly. They moved away from the main street into the alley between the medical office and the bank, where conversations were less likely to be overheard. Morrison glanced around once to ensure privacy, then spoke in a low, urgent tone. Briggs is planning a raid. 3 nights from now, assuming the new moon gives them darkness to work with. He's recruited about 15 men, mostly hotheads and troublemakers, but a few supposedly respectable citizens, too. They're calling it a lawful removal of an illegal resident, but everyone knows what it really is? Caleb's blood ran cold. How do you know this? One of the men Briggs recruited is my nephew, fool kid who thinks wearing a badge makes him important. He was drunk last night and bragging about it to anyone who'd listen. I sobered him up and got the details. Will he testify to that? Go on record? Not a chance. He's scared of Briggs and more scared of being ostracized by the rest of the town. But I'm telling you so you can prepare. 3 nights, Caleb. That's all the time you have. Then we'll use it. Caleb gripped Morrison's shoulder. Thank you, Doc, for everything. Don't thank me. Just survive. And when this is over, we're going to have a serious conversation about the future of this town, because I'm sick of watching cowards and bullies run things while good people stay silent. Caleb rode back to the ranch with his mind racing through options and scenarios. 3 nights wasn't much time, but it was enough to prepare a defense or organize an escape. The question was which path gave them the better chance of survival. When he told Nara what Morrison had shared, her reaction was immediate and fierce. We fight, she said. We have prepared for this. We have weapons, defensible positions, the advantage of knowing they are coming. If we run now, they win. If we fight and survive, we show them that we cannot be intimidated. And if we fight and lose, if they burn us out, or worse, then we lose fighting for something that matters instead of running from everything that scares us. She took his hands, her grip strong and certain. I have run for 3 years, Caleb. I will not run anymore. Whatever happens, I face it here with you. Caleb wanted to argue, to insist on the safer path, but he recognized the futility. Nara had made her choice, and short of tying her up and forcing her onto a horse, which he'd never do, there was no changing her mind. More than that, he realized he didn't want to change it. She was right. Running solved nothing except postponing the inevitable. They'd spend the rest of their lives looking over their shoulders, always one step ahead of the next threat. Better to make a stand here, on land Caleb had built a life on, and see it through to whatever end awaited them. All right, he said, we fight. But we fight smart. No heroics, no unnecessary risks. We defend, we hold our ground, and if the opportunity comes to end this without bloodshed, we take it. Agreed. They spent the next 2 days preparing in earnest. Caleb moved all the ammunition into the house and distributed weapons strategically. Rifles at windows overlooking the approach routes, pistols within easy reach in every room. He filled barrels with water and positioned them near the house in case of fire, then cleared brush and debris that could be used as cover by attackers. Nara fashioned improvised deterrents from her knowledge of Apache defensive tactics, tripwires in the darkness beyond the house, carefully placed obstacles to funnel attackers into predictable patterns, even a few false positions with propped-up scarecrows to draw fire away from their actual locations. You learned this from your father? Caleb asked, watching her work with practiced efficiency. From my father, my uncles, my husband. Apache children learn to defend before they learn to hunt. We have always been outnumbered, always fighting enemies with better weapons and more resources. Survival requires using every advantage, no matter how small. I'm glad you're on my side. She smiled, fierce and beautiful. I will always be on your side, Caleb Turner, until the end. On the evening of the 3rd day, they sat together on the porch, watching the sun set in a blaze of orange and purple. The new moon would rise in a few hours, or rather, wouldn't rise, its dark face perfect for men who preferred to do their violence under cover of night. Are you afraid? Nara asked quietly. Caleb considered the question honestly. Yes, but not of dying. I've lived long enough that death doesn't scare me the way it used to. I'm afraid of failing you, of making the wrong choice and watching you pay the price for my stubbornness. You could never fail me. You have given me something I thought lost forever, a reason to stop running, a place to belong, someone who sees me as human rather than problem to be solved. She leaned against his shoulder. Whatever happens tonight, know that you have already saved me in every way that matters. They sat like that until darkness fell, drawing strength from each other's presence. When full night descended and the world became shapes and shadows, they moved inside and took their positions. Caleb stationed himself at the front window with a clear view of the approach from town. Nara covered the side and rear, moving between windows with the quiet efficiency of someone accustomed to watching for danger. They'd agreed on signals. 2 sharp whistles meant riders approaching. 3 meant immediate threat. 1 long whistle meant stand down. The hours crawled past. Midnight came and went. Caleb's eyes ached from staring into darkness, seeing threats in every shadow and gust of wind. Maybe Morrison had been wrong about the timing. Maybe Briggs had called it off. Maybe 2 sharp whistles cut through the silence. Caleb's heart hammered as he strained to see through the darkness. At first, nothing. Then gradually, shapes resolved from the shadows. Riders moving slowly, deliberately, trying for stealth, but betrayed by the faint jingle of tack and the soft thud of hooves on earth. He counted them. 8, 10, 12. More than expected, but not the 15 Morrison had warned about. Maybe some had backed out at the last moment, unwilling to cross the final line between talk and action. The riders stopped about 50 yards from the house, just beyond easy rifle range. They sat in silence for a long moment, and Caleb could almost feel them gathering courage, psyching themselves up for what came next. Then a voice called out, Marshal Briggs, recognizable even at a distance. "Caleb Turner, we're here on official business. Send out the woman, and there won't be trouble." Caleb moved to the door, cracking it open just enough to shout back. "She's done nothing wrong, Briggs. You've got no legal authority to take her. I've got all the authority I need, the authority of a community protecting itself from criminal elements. Now stop wasting time and send her out, or we'll come in and get her." "Try it," Caleb called back. "First man through that door gets a bullet. So does the second and third. You really want that on your conscience?" Silence. Then a different voice, younger, uncertain. "We don't want violence, Mr. Turner. We just want what's right." "What's right," Caleb shouted, "is leaving people in peace. What's right is not terrorizing a woman who's already lost everything. You want to do what's right? Turn around and go home. Tell yourselves tomorrow that you chose decency over hate." More silence. Caleb could see the riders shifting, talking among themselves. Some wavered. He could see it in their body language, the way they glanced at each other seeking reassurance or permission to back down. Then Briggs' voice cut through the doubt. "You had your chance, Turner. Boys, light them up." Torches flared to life, sudden and bright, carried by men who'd been hanging back in the darkness. Caleb's stomach dropped. They weren't here to arrest anyone. They were here to burn him out. "3 whistles," he shouted to Nara. "They're coming!" The riders surged forward, torches held high, and Caleb knew the moment for words had passed. He raised his rifle and fired, not at the men, but at the ground in front of the lead horse. The animal reared, throwing its rider, and the charge faltered as other horses shied away from the gunshot. But they didn't stop. Briggs drove them forward, and suddenly the yard was full of riders, torches arcing through the air toward the house and barn. Caleb fired again, this time aiming for effect. A man cried out, grabbing his shoulder, and his torch fell harmlessly to the dirt. From the side of the house, Nara's rifle cracked. Once, twice, and 2 more torches went dark as their bearers dove for cover. 1 torch landed on the barn roof. Another hit the porch, flames spreading quickly across dry wood. Caleb cursed and abandoned his position, grabbing a water barrel and dousing the porch before the fire could spread to the house. In the chaos, he saw a figure running toward the barn, someone trying to make sure it caught properly. Rage surged through him. The barn held his winter hay, his tack, everything he'd need to survive if they made it through this night. He intercepted the runner, tackling him hard to the ground. They struggled briefly before Caleb recognized the face in the flickering firelight. Hoskins, the storekeeper, his expression twisted with hate and fear. "You brought this on yourself," Hoskins gasped, trying to throw Caleb off. "You chose her over us." "I chose right over wrong," Caleb growled, landing a solid punch that left Hoskins dazed. "Maybe you should try it sometime." He hauled Hoskins up and shoved him toward the other riders, who were regrouping after the initial repulse. The barn was burning now, flames climbing the walls and licking at the roof, casting the entire scene in hellish orange light. "Fall back," Briggs shouted. "Regroup at the fence line." The riders retreated, dragging their wounded, leaving Caleb and Nara standing in front of the burning barn. The heat was intense, smoke thick and choking. They'd held the house, but the barn was lost. Nara appeared at his side, soot-streaked and fierce. "Are you hurt?" "No. You?" "I am fine. But Caleb, look." She pointed toward the road, and Caleb's heart sank. More riders were coming, torches bobbing in the darkness. Reinforcements. They'd held off 12 men, but 20? 30? This was the end then. They'd made their stand, fought their fight, and now they'd face whatever came next together. But as the new riders drew closer, something seemed wrong. They weren't charging or shouting. They were moving slowly, deliberately, spreading out to block the road rather than advancing on the house. And then Caleb recognized the lead rider. Samuel Grant sat tall in the saddle, rifle across his lap, flanked by a dozen of his ranch hands and, unbelievably, a handful of townspeople. Doc Morrison was there, looking grim but determined. Sarah Chen rode beside him, holding a torch high. Even old Tom Hastings had come, ancient cavalry rifle in his weathered hands. "Evening, Briggs," Grant called out, his voice carrying across the yard. "Seems like you're having a party and forgot to invite the rest of us." Briggs wheeled his horse to face the new arrivals. "This is official business, Grant. Stay out of it." "Official business?" Grant gestured at the burning barn. "Looks more like arson and attempted murder to me, but I'm not a lawman, so what do I know?" "These people are harboring a fugitive, a woman who's committed no crime in this territory and who has every right to be here until a proper court says otherwise." Grant's voice hardened. "You want to arrest her, Marshal? You do it through proper channels. You don't organize a mob and burn people out of their homes in the middle of the night. That's not law. That's terrorism. You're defending criminals. I'm defending my neighbors, and I'm telling you and your boys here that if you take one more step toward that house, you'll have to go through all of us first." The standoff stretched taut, violence hanging in the air like smoke. Caleb could see Briggs calculating odds, trying to decide if his authority and righteousness could overcome Grant's wealth and the unexpected show of resistance. Finally, Mayor Whitfield, Caleb spotted him among Briggs's group now, spoke up. "This has gotten out of hand, Marshal. We should withdraw and address this through proper legal channels tomorrow." "Proper channels?" Briggs's voice dripped with contempt. "You authorized this action, Whitfield. Don't pretend you didn't. I authorized a lawful arrest, not a lynch mob. There's a difference, and I won't be party to violence." Whitfield turned his horse. "I'm going back to town. Anyone with sense should do the same." One by one, the riders who'd come with Briggs began to peel away, unwilling to escalate further now that their actions were being witnessed and challenged. Some looked ashamed, others just relieved to escape a situation that had spun beyond their control. Briggs sat alone in the firelight, rage and humiliation warring on his face. Finally, he spat in the dirt and turned his horse toward town. "This isn't over, Turner," he called back. "Not by a long shot." Then he was gone, and the yard fell quiet except for the crackle of the burning barn. Grant dismounted and walked over to Caleb and Nara, his face grim. "Barn's a total loss, I'm afraid. But the house is intact and you're both alive. That's something." "How did you know?" Caleb asked, voice rough with smoke and emotion. "Doc sent word this afternoon. We've been watching the road, waiting to see if Briggs would actually go through with it." Grant looked at the assembled townspeople. Fewer than a dozen, but their presence spoke volumes. Not everyone in Redemption agrees with what happened here tonight. Some of us still remember what it means to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. Sarah Chen approached, her expression unreadable. "The laundry's still open for business, Mr. Turner, and my offer of shelter stands should you need it." "Thank you," Nara said quietly, "for coming, for risking yourselves." "We should be thanking you," Morrison replied. "You forced us to look at what we've become, what we've been willing to tolerate. That's not comfortable, but it's necessary." Old Tom Hastings spoke up, his voice gravelly with age. "Fought a war once because I believed in freedom and justice for all. Lost too many good men watching to stand by while bullies destroy what they can't control. You two are braver than most, and that deserves defending." One by one, the others voiced their support. Tentative, qualified in some cases, but genuine. They'd come when it mattered. When the cost of silence finally outweighed the comfort of compliance. It wasn't everyone. It wasn't even most of the town, but it was enough to shift the balance, to transform Caleb and Nara's lonely stand into something larger, a crack in the foundation of the prejudice that had ruled Redemption for too long. As the fire in the barn burned itself out and the supporters dispersed with promises to help rebuild, Caleb and Nara stood together surveying the damage. The barn was gone, reduced to smoking timbers and ash, but the house stood firm, and they stood with it. "We won," Nara said, wonder evident in her voice. "Not completely, not permanently, but tonight. We won." "We did," Caleb agreed, pulling her close. "Together." She leaned into him, and they watched the embers glow in the darkness. Two people who'd chosen to stand when running seemed safer, who'd fought when surrender seemed inevitable, who'd found allies in the most unexpected places. The battle wasn't over. Briggs would regroup, the town's prejudice wouldn't evaporate overnight, and the road ahead remained dangerous and uncertain. But for the first time since this began, Caleb felt something he'd almost forgotten: hope. Dawn broke over the charred remains of the barn, pale light revealing the full extent of the damage. Blackened timbers jutted from the ground like broken bones, and ash covered everything in a fine gray powder. Caleb stood in the ruins, sifting through what could be salvaged: a few tools that had survived the heat, some tack that had been stored in the corner farthest from where the fire started. Most of it was gone. Nara found him there an hour after sunrise, 2 cups of coffee in her hands. She'd barely slept, he knew. Neither of them had. The adrenaline of the night before had given way to exhaustion, mixed with the strange electric awareness that came from surviving something that should have destroyed them. "How bad is it?" she asked, handing him a cup. "Bad enough. Lost the winter hay, most of the feed, all the spare tack." He gestured at the ruins. "But it could have been worse. If they'd gotten to the house, if Grant hadn't shown up when he did." But they did not, and he did. Nara sipped her coffee, surveying the damage with the practical eye of someone who'd learned long ago not to dwell on what couldn't be changed. "We rebuild. We have done it before." "You have. I've spent most of my life maintaining what was already built." Caleb set down his cup and picked up a shovel. "Guess it's time I learned something new." They worked through the morning, clearing debris and making plans for reconstruction. The physical labor was almost welcome, a concrete task with visible progress, unlike the murky political battle they'd been fighting. By noon, they'd cleared enough space to begin thinking about the actual rebuilding. That's when the wagons started arriving. The first was Samuel Grant's, loaded with fresh lumber and driven by 2 of his ranch hands. Grant himself rode alongside, surveying the destruction with a critical eye. "Thought you might need materials," he said by way of greeting. "Got plenty of timber I've been meaning to use anyway. Might as well be for something worthwhile." Before Caleb could formulate a response, another wagon appeared. Doc Morrison with medical supplies and food from his own pantry. Then Sarah Chen with blankets and spare clothes. Old Tom Hastings brought tools and his own weathered hands, ready to work. Even a few townspeople Caleb barely knew showed up. Some sheepish, others defiant, but all offering help. "What is this?" Nara asked quietly, watching the growing assembly with wonder and suspicion in equal measure. "Guilt, mostly," Morrison said, overhearing. "People are starting to realize what almost happened last night, what they almost allowed to happen. This is them trying to make it right." "Can it be made right?" Nara's voice was sharp. "Yesterday, these same people stood silent while a mob tried to burn us out. Today they bring lumber and food? What changes tomorrow when the next crisis comes?" "Maybe nothing," Morrison admitted. "Or maybe everything. People are complicated, Miss Vela. They do terrible things out of fear and good things out of shame, and sometimes those contradictory impulses exist in the same person at the same time. The question isn't whether they're perfect. Nobody is. The question is whether they're willing to be better." Sarah Chen approached, holding a basket covered with a cloth. "I brought bread, fresh this morning." She met Nara's eyes directly. "I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness. I stayed silent when I should have spoken. I was afraid of losing my business, my livelihood, everything I'd built. But fear doesn't excuse cowardice. So I'm here now, doing what I should have done from the beginning." Nara studied her for a long moment, then accepted the basket. "Thank you, for the bread and for the honesty." The work began in earnest then. Grant and his hands framed out the new barn structure, while Caleb and Tom Hastings cleared the foundation. Morrison organized the supplies, and Sarah coordinated the food. Someone had to make sure the workers stayed fed. More people arrived throughout the day, some bringing materials, others just muscle and determination. By evening, the skeleton of a new barn stood where the old one had burned, rough but solid. It wasn't finished, not even close, But the transformation from ruin to rebuilding in a single day spoke to something larger than construction. It spoke to possibility, to the idea that destruction didn't have to be permanent, that communities could choose repair over abandonment. As the workers prepared to leave, promising to return the next day, Mayor Whitfield rode up. He looked diminished somehow, smaller than Caleb remembered, as if the events of the previous night had stripped away some essential authority he'd worn like armor. "Mr. Turner," Whitfield said, dismounting with visible effort. "Might I have a word?" Caleb gestured toward the porch, and they sat in the same chairs where he and Nara had shared so many evening conversations. Whitfield looked at the partially rebuilt barn, at the workers departing with waves and promises to return, at the evidence of community forming where division had reigned. "I owe you an apology," Whitfield said finally. "What happened last night? I authorized it, or at least didn't stop it when I had the power to. I told myself it was about law and order, about protecting the community. But the truth is, I was scared. Scared that change was coming whether I liked it or not. Scared that the world I understood was disappearing. Scared that admitting I was wrong would mean losing everything I'd built my authority on." "And now?" Caleb asked. "Now I'm still scared, but I'm more ashamed than scared, and that's something." Whitfield rubbed his face tiredly. "I came to tell you that I've asked for Marshal Briggs' resignation. He refused, so I've suspended him pending a formal inquiry into last night's actions. The town council will meet next week to address his conduct and determine appropriate consequences." Caleb felt a surge of something, not quite victory, but vindication. "He won't go quietly." "No, he won't. He's already talking about appealing to territorial authorities, claiming I'm overstepping my authority as mayor. But after what happened, I don't think he'll find much support. People saw what he did, saw what he was willing to do. That kind of violence can't be unseen. Will it be enough? Suspending one man doesn't change the attitudes that allowed him to act in the first place." "You're right. It won't. But it's a start." Whitfield stood, preparing to leave. "I can't undo what's been done, Mr. Turner. Can't give back what you lost or erase the fear and pain my cowardice enabled. All I can do is try to be better going forward and use whatever authority I have left to make sure something like last night never happens again in redemption." He extended his hand. Caleb looked at it, thinking about everything this man had enabled through action and inaction, all the small cruelties that had built to attempted murder. Part of him wanted to refuse the gesture, to make Whitfield live with the full weight of his choices. But Nara's words echoed in his mind. People are complicated. They do terrible things out of fear and good things out of shame. He shook Whitfield's hand. "See that you do. And Mayor, next time you're scared, remember that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing the right thing despite it." After Whitfield left, Nara joined Caleb on the porch. They sat in silence for a while, watching the last light fade from the western sky. The new barn stood in silhouette against the sunset, incomplete but present, a promise of what could be built if people chose to build rather than destroy. "Do you believe him?" Nara asked. "Whitfield, I mean. Do you believe he will change?" "I believe he'll try. Whether that's enough?" Caleb shrugged. "Guess we'll find out." "And Briggs? A suspended marshal with wounded pride and a gun is more dangerous than one with authority." "I know. We'll have to stay alert. But Nara, for the first time since this started, I don't feel like we're fighting alone. That matters." She leaned against his shoulder, and they sat like that as night fell, two people who'd survived a battle but knew the war wasn't over. The following days brought a rhythm Caleb hadn't experienced since Margaret's death. The rhythm of community, of shared purpose, of people working together towards something larger than individual survival. The barn rose steadily, beam by beam, as volunteers rotated through with materials and labor. Grant's ranch hands taught Caleb techniques for faster construction. Tom Hastings shared wisdom earned through decades of frontier building. Even people who'd never spoken to Caleb before showed up, drawn by word of mouth and the simple human need to be part of something good after witnessing something terrible. Nara worked alongside them all, her initial suspicion gradually giving way to cautious acceptance. She still carried her knife and kept a rifle within reach, still scanned the horizon for threats, but the constant tension that had defined her existence for 3 years began slowly to ease. One afternoon, while taking a break from roofing work, Sarah Chen sat beside her with a ladle of water. "You don't trust us yet," Sarah observed. It wasn't a question. "Should I?" Nara replied. "2 weeks ago, this town wanted me arrested or dead. Now they bring lumber and nails. What guarantees they will not change their minds again when the next crisis comes? None. No guarantees at all." Sarah took a drink herself, then passed the ladle. "I've lived in Redemption for 20 years, came from California during the gold rush, stayed when my husband died because I had nowhere else to go. In that time, I've been called every slur you can imagine, had my business vandalized, been told I should go back to China even though I was born in San Francisco. But I stayed because leaving felt like letting them win. That is not the same as what I have survived. No, you're right. It's not. Your suffering is yours, and I won't pretend to understand its depth. But I know something about living with people who see you as less than human, who tolerate you only because you're useful, who would turn on you the moment you stop being profitable or convenient." Sarah met Nara's eyes. "What I'm trying to say is that you're right not to trust easily. Trust has to be earned, especially by people who've proven themselves untrustworthy. But don't let distrust prevent you from seeing when people are genuinely trying to change. And you believe they are changing? Some of them, maybe not most, maybe not permanently, but enough to matter. The woman who brings food every day? Her son was in Briggs' mob that night. She didn't know until he came home reeking of smoke and guilt. And when he confessed, she beat him with a broom handle and made him come apologize to you and Mr. Turner. That's her way of saying she's ashamed of what she raised and trying to make it right." Nara hadn't known that. She looked at the woman in question, middle-aged, weathered, stirring a pot of stew with fierce concentration, and saw the story written in the set of her shoulders, the determined way she refused to meet anyone's eyes directly. "She has not apologized to me personally," Nara said, "probably too ashamed. Some people express remorse through action because words feel inadequate." Sarah stood, brushing dust from her skirt. "I'm not saying you have to forgive anyone. That's your choice, and whatever you decide is valid. I'm just saying that change is possible, even in people who seem fixed in their cruelty. I've seen it, lived it, and if people like us don't leave room for that possibility, then we're just accepting that the world will always be this broken." She walked away, leaving Nara alone with thoughts that tumbled and twisted like leaves in wind. Forgiveness felt impossible, trust even more so. But Sarah was right about one thing. Action spoke louder than words, and the actions Nara had witnessed over the past week suggested something shifting beneath Redemption's hardened surface. Whether that shift would last was another question entirely. That evening, as Caleb and Nara reviewed the day's progress, a rider appeared on the horizon. Not from town this time, but from the east, a territorial marshal in official uniform accompanied by 2 deputies. Caleb's stomach tightened. This was it then. Whatever authority Whitfield had suspended Briggs with, higher powers were about to weigh in. The marshal was a man named Coleman, weathered and serious, with eyes that suggested he'd seen too much to be easily fooled. He introduced himself formally, then asked to speak with both Caleb and Nara. They sat in the house, Coleman across from them at the kitchen table, deputies standing by the door more as protocol than threat. "I'm here investigating reports of civil unrest," Coleman began. "Arson, attempted assault, possible abuse of authority by local law enforcement. I've taken statements from Mayor Whitfield, several townspeople, and Marshal Briggs himself. Now I'd like to hear your account." Caleb told the story from the beginning, finding Nara injured, bringing her to his ranch, the escalating tension with Briggs and the town, culminating in the barn burning and Grant's intervention. He kept his tone neutral, stating facts without embellishment or emotional appeal. When he finished, Coleman turned to Nara. "Miss Vela, are you the same Nara who was being transported to Oklahoma Reservation 2 months ago?" There was no point in lying. "I am." "And you escaped military custody?" "I left. Custody implies I was being justly held. I was being removed from my home and sent to die on a reservation because men with guns decided my people did not deserve to exist freely." Her voice was steady, defiant. "If that is a crime in your law, then I am guilty. But your law is unjust." Coleman's expression didn't change. "I'm not here to debate the justice of federal Indian policy, Miss Vela. I'm here to determine whether local laws were broken, and if so, by whom." And what have you determined? Caleb asked. That this situation is complicated beyond my authority to resolve. The matter of Miss Vela's status is a federal issue, not local. I have no jurisdiction to arrest her or compel her movement. That would require federal marshals operating under specific orders from territorial or federal authorities. Briggs claimed he had that authority, Caleb said. Marshal Briggs was wrong. Local law enforcement can assist federal authorities if requested, but they can't act independently on federal matters. Everything Briggs did was outside his legal authority, which means he wasn't enforcing law. He was enforcing his personal judgment. Coleman leaned back. That's a problem, a serious one, which is why I'm recommending his permanent removal from office and potential criminal charges for abuse of authority, incitement to violence, and arson. Relief flooded through Caleb. So, Nara can stay? Until federal authorities decide otherwise, yes, but Mr. Turner, understand, this is temporary protection, not permanent resolution. If the federal government decides to pursue Miss Vela's return to custody, I won't be able to stop them. Neither will local authorities. You'd need a lawyer, a court case, maybe even congressional intervention to challenge the underlying policy. Then that's what we'll do, Caleb said firmly. Coleman studied them both, something like respect in his expression. You're braver than most, or more foolish. I can't decide which. He stood. I'll file my report with territorial authorities. Mayor Whitfield will appoint an interim marshal until a permanent replacement can be found. And I'll recommend that federal authorities leave this matter alone unless Miss Vela actively breaks laws or causes trouble. No guarantees, but it's the best I can offer. It's more than we had yesterday, Nara said. Thank you, Marshal. Don't thank me. Thank the people who stood up when it mattered. They're the ones who turned this from a lynching into a legal question. All I did was follow the evidence where it led. After Coleman and his deputies left, Caleb and Nara sat in stunned silence, processing what had just happened. The immediate threat had passed. Briggs was being removed. Federal authorities might still come eventually, but for now, they had breathing room, time to build defenses, gather support, maybe even find a legal path forward. We won again, Nara said, wonder evident in her voice. How is this possible? Because people chose to make it possible, Caleb replied. Grant, Morrison, Sarah, even Whitfield in his own conflicted way. They could have stayed silent, let Briggs have his way, told themselves it wasn't their problem, but they didn't. They stood up. Do you think it will last, this solidarity? Caleb considered the question honestly. I think it's fragile. I think fear and prejudice run deep, and one victory doesn't erase generations of hatred, but I also think something changed the night that barn burned. People were forced to confront what their silence enabled, and some of them didn't like what they saw. That awareness doesn't disappear easily. Nara took his hand, lacing their fingers together. I never thought I would find this again. A place to belong, someone to belong with. After Dakota and Isi died, I believed that part of my life was over, that I would spend whatever years remained running and hiding and surviving, but never truly living. And now I begin to believe that maybe, just maybe, I can build something new here. Not to replace what I lost, but to honor it by refusing to let loss define my entire existence. She smiled, and it was radiant despite the shadows that still lingered in her eyes. You gave me that, Caleb Turner. You and your stubborn refusal to accept injustice just because everyone else did. I just did what anyone should have done. But you were the one who actually did it. That is the difference between should and is. She kissed him then, soft and tender and full of promise. Thank you for everything. They spent the evening on the porch, as had become their custom, watching the new barn take shape in the fading light. It wasn't finished yet, still needed walls and proper roofing, stalls and storage, but the foundation was solid, the frame strong. A testament to what could be built when people chose cooperation over conflict. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Briggs might not accept his removal quietly. Federal authorities could still arrive with arrest warrants and overwhelming force. The town's tentative support could evaporate at the first sign of trouble. Nothing was certain, nothing guaranteed. But tonight, they had peace. They had each other. They had a community that had chosen, however imperfectly, to stand with them rather than against them. And for two people who'd survived so much loss and loneliness, That felt like a kind of miracle. The next week brought completion of the barn and with it, a subtle but significant shift in Redemption's social landscape. Caleb noticed it first in the general store, where Hoskins, released after spending a night in the territorial marshal's custody for his role in the burning, actually made eye contact and mumbled something that might have been an apology. Then at the bank, where the clerk processed his transaction without the usual contemptuous delay. Small changes, barely noticeable individually, but together suggesting cracks forming in the wall of hostility that had surrounded them. The most dramatic change came from Reverend Matthews, who appeared at the ranch one afternoon looking distinctly uncomfortable. "Mr. Turner," he said, hat in hands, "might I speak with you and Miss Vela?" They gathered in the main room, Matthews perched awkwardly on the edge of a chair, clearly struggling with whatever had brought him here. "I've been doing considerable reflection since the events of last week," he began, "and I've come to realize that my behavior, my words, and my silence contributed to an atmosphere that enabled violence. That troubles me deeply, as it should trouble any man who claims to follow principles of compassion and justice." Caleb waited, saying nothing. "I was wrong," Matthews continued, the words clearly difficult. "Wrong to characterize Miss Vela as a threat based solely on her heritage. Wrong to support Briggs' vendetta under the guise of moral authority. Wrong to let fear override the very principles I'm supposed to uphold." He looked directly at Nara. "I cannot undo the harm my words caused, but I can publicly acknowledge my error and commit to doing better, which is why I've announced to my congregation that you are both welcome in our community, and that anyone who treats you otherwise will answer to me personally." Nara's eyebrows rose. "That is unexpected." "I imagine so. I've spent years preaching one thing and practicing another. Time I aligned the two." Matthews stood. "I don't expect your forgiveness or your friendship. I simply wanted you to know that I see my failure clearly now, and I'm committed to changing." After he left, Nara looked at Caleb with something approaching disbelief. "The preacher who called my people heathens 2 weeks ago just offered us protection?" "People are complicated," Caleb said, echoing Morrison's words, "capable of terrible things and redemptive things, sometimes within the same span of time." "Do you believe him? That he will truly change?" "I believe he's ashamed enough to try. Whether that translates to lasting change," Caleb shrugged, "we'll see. But Nara, if we don't leave room for people to change, we're just accepting that everything stays broken forever." She nodded slowly, processing this. The world she'd known for 3 years had been rigidly divided, those who hunted her and those who ignored her, with no middle ground and no possibility of movement between categories. This new reality, where yesterday's enemies became today's uncertain allies, required a fundamental reorganization of how she understood human nature. It was terrifying and hopeful in equal measure. That evening, Samuel Grant arrived with news that completed the week's transformations. The town council had voted unanimously to make permanent Briggs's removal and to establish new guidelines for law enforcement that explicitly prohibited discrimination based on heritage or origin. More significantly, they'd voted to offer Caleb formal recognition as a landowner in good standing with all attendant rights and protections, including the right to determine who lived on his property without interference from local authorities. "It's not much," Grant admitted. "Still doesn't protect against federal action if they decide to pursue it, but it means the town officially recognizes Miss Vela's right to be here. That's a line in the sand they can't easily cross back over." "Why?" Nara asked. "Why this change now, when 2 weeks ago they wanted me gone?" "Because you forced them to choose," Grant replied. "For years, people in Redemption could hold their prejudices quietly, never having to confront what those beliefs meant in practice. But when Briggs tried to burn you out, they couldn't look away anymore. They had to choose, actively support violence or actively oppose it. And once people make that choice publicly, it's harder to unmake it without admitting they were cowards or monsters. Most people aren't willing to see themselves that way." He was right, Caleb realized. The barn burning had been catalytic, not despite its violence, but because of it. Because it stripped away all the comfortable abstractions and forced concrete decisions. Stand with cruelty or stand against it. No middle ground, no space for rationalization. And enough people had chosen to stand against it that the town's moral center had shifted, however slightly. The barn was finished 3 days later. It stood proud and solid, smelling of fresh-cut wood and possibility. At Grant's suggestion, they held a raising celebration, a gathering of everyone who'd helped with construction, plus anyone from town who wanted to come. Caleb had been skeptical about the idea, worried it would feel forced or attract trouble, but Nara had surprised him by supporting it. "Let them see," she'd said. "Let them see what can be built when people work together instead of tearing each other down. Let them see that I am not a threat but a person, and that choosing to include me made them stronger rather than weaker." So they'd sent word, and on a clear Saturday afternoon, people came. Not everyone. Plenty of Redemption's citizens still nursed their resentments in private, but enough to fill the yard with conversation and laughter. Grant brought beer from his ranch stores. Sarah Chen organized food. Doc Morrison told stories that made everyone laugh. Even Mayor Whitfield appeared, looking less diminished than he had the week before, as if publicly acknowledging his failures had somehow restored rather than destroyed his authority. As the afternoon wore into evening and the celebration continued, Caleb found himself standing with Nara by the new barn, watching the gathering with something approaching contentment. "I never imagined this," Nara said quietly. "When I first came here bleeding and starving and certain I would die alone in the wilderness, I never imagined I would end up here. Safe, accepted, home." "Neither did I," Caleb admitted. "I thought I was saving you that night by the creek. Turns out you were saving me too." She smiled. "We saved each other. That is how the best things happen. Not through one person's heroism, but through mutual recognition that we are all broken and all capable of healing if we have help." But Caleb pulled her close, and they stood like that while the celebration continued around them. Two people who'd found unexpected connection in the midst of chaos, who'd chosen to fight for something better than survival, who discovered that courage was contagious and that communities could change when individuals refused to accept things as they were. The future remained uncertain. Federal authorities might still come. Old prejudices might resurface. The fragile alliance that had formed around them could fracture under pressure. But tonight, under stars that blazed across the Texas sky, surrounded by people who'd chosen inclusion over isolation, Caleb and Nara stood together in the home they'd defended and the community they'd helped transform. And that was enough. Winter arrived early that year, bringing with it a cold that settled deep into the bones and a silence that felt both peaceful and precarious. The ranch had found its rhythm again, cattle fed and sheltered, fences mended, the new barn standing solid against the wind that swept down from the northern plains. But underneath the surface calm, Caleb felt the weight of unfinished business pressing against his chest like a hand. The federal question remained unanswered. Marshal Coleman's report had bought them time, but time wasn't resolution. Every morning, Caleb woke wondering if this would be the day riders appeared with official warrants and overwhelming authority. Every evening, he and Nara sat on the porch watching the road, grateful for another day of peace but unable to fully relax into it. 3 months after the barn burning, the answer came in the form of a letter delivered by the Territorial Postal Service. Caleb recognized the official seal immediately: Department of the Interior, Office of Indian Affairs. His hand shook slightly as he broke the wax and unfolded the heavy paper. Nara stood beside him, reading over his shoulder, her body tense with anticipation and dread. The letter was formal, bureaucratic, filled with language designed to obscure rather than clarify. But the essential message was clear. Pursuant to reports from territorial authorities and statements from local officials, the Office of Indian Affairs had determined that forcible relocation of individuals who posed no threat to public safety and who had established lawful residence was not in the interest of territorial stability. Therefore, the matter of one Nara Vela was to be considered closed, with no further action required. Caleb read it 3 times, certain he must be misunderstanding. Then he looked at Nara, saw the same disbelief and cautious hope reflected in her expression. "Does this mean what I think it means?" she asked quietly. "I think it means you're free. Officially, legally free to stay." The words hung in the air between them, too enormous to fully comprehend. 3 years of running, of fear, of constant vigilance, ended by a bureaucratic letter that reduced her entire ordeal to a matter of administrative convenience. Nara's legs gave out, and she sat hard on the porch steps, the letter trembling in her hands. Caleb sat beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders while she processed the enormity of what had just changed. "I do not understand," she said finally. "Why now? Why this decision?" Coleman's report, probably. combined with Whitfield's statements and whatever Grant might have communicated through his political connections. Caleb had learned that Grant's influence extended far beyond redemption. He had friends in the territorial legislature, business partners in the capital, enough pull to make bureaucrats pay attention when he decided something mattered. They decided it was easier to leave you alone than deal with the complications of forcibly removing someone who'd become inconvenient to remove. Inconvenient? Nara laughed, but it was edged with bitterness. My freedom comes not from justice, but from political calculation. I am allowed to exist because removing me would create problems for men I have never met. I know it's not the victory you deserved, but it's still a victory. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the letter as if it might disappear or transform into something else if she looked away. Then she folded it carefully and tucked it into her pocket. You are right, it is a victory, even if it comes from imperfect sources. I am free. After 3 years of running, of fear, of never knowing if tomorrow would bring soldiers or bounty hunters, I am free. She turned to Caleb, tears streaming down her face now, all the emotion she'd been holding back for years finally finding release. I can stay. I can build a life here. I can stop looking over my shoulder waiting for the next crisis. Caleb pulled her close, and they sat like that on the porch steps while she cried, great heaving sobs that seemed to pull years of trauma and fear out through her chest. He held her through it, saying nothing because nothing needed to be said. This moment belonged to her grief and her relief in equal measure, and all he could do was be present for both. When the tears finally subsided, Nara pulled back and wiped her eyes. I am sorry, I did not mean to. Don't apologize. You've earned those tears 100 times over. She smiled, watery but genuine. What do we do now? It was a good question. The immediate crisis had passed, the legal threats resolved, but life stretched ahead of them, empty of urgency but full of possibility. What did people do when survival stopped being the only goal? I suppose we figure out how to live, Caleb said. Really live. Not just survive. Build something that lasts beyond today or tomorrow. Make plans that extend past the next threat. I do not remember how to do that. It has been so long since I could think beyond immediate survival. Then we'll learn together. I'm out of practice myself. They spent the rest of that day in quiet celebration. No grand gestures, just the simple pleasure of existing without fear. They walked the property line together, Nara seeing it with new eyes now that it represented home rather than temporary shelter. They worked side by side repairing a section of fence, the labor meditative rather than urgent. They sat on the porch as evening fell, watching stars emerge against the darkening sky, and talked about futures that suddenly seemed possible. I want to learn to read properly, Nara said. I know some English, can speak it well enough, but reading still escapes me. If I am to build a life here, I should understand the language fully. I can teach you. Margaret had books, shelves full of them. We'll start with the simple ones and work up from there. And I will teach you what I know, tracking, wilderness survival, medicine from plants, skills you have not needed but might someday. Deal. Caleb extended his hand and they shook on it solemnly. Then he added, There's something else I've been thinking about. Something I want to ask you, but I need you to know there's no pressure. You can say no and nothing changes between us. Nara's expression became guarded. What is it? Marry me. The words hung in the cold air, simple and enormous. Nara stared at him, clearly not having expected this. You want to marry me? Officially? If you'll have me. I know it's complicated. We've only known each other a few months, and most of that time has been crisis. But Nara, I'm 52 years old. I've loved and lost, lived alone for 15 years, convinced myself that chapter of my life was closed. And then you showed up bleeding by my creek, and everything changed. You made me remember what it feels like to care about something beyond routine and safety. You made me brave when I'd forgotten how to be anything but cautious. He took her hands, feeling the calluses earned through hard work and harder survival. I'm not asking because I think you need protecting or because I want to save you. You've saved yourself more times than I can count, and you'll keep doing it with or without me. I'm asking because I love you. Because I want to build a life with you, not just survive alongside you. Because when I imagine my future, you're in every part of it. Nara's eyes glistened with fresh tears. Caleb Turner, you are the most unexpected man I have ever met. When I came here, I was running from death and waiting for it to catch me. I did not think I deserved happiness again after losing Dakota and Isi. Did not think I could bear to love someone and risk that loss repeating. I understand if, but you taught me something, she continued, cutting him off gently. You taught me that love is not a finite resource that runs out when we lose people. It regenerates, grows back, finds new forms. Loving you does not diminish what I felt for Dakota. It honors it by proving that the capacity for love he helped build in me survived his death. She stood, pulling Caleb to his feet, and took his face in her hands. Yes, I will marry you, not because I need you, but because I choose you. Because you saw me as human when the world saw me as problem. Because you stood beside me when standing alone would have been safer. Because you are kind and brave and stubborn, and I want to spend whatever years we have building something beautiful together. Caleb kissed her then, deep and tender, and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both were smiling through tears. Spring, Nara said. We should marry in the spring, when the land comes back to life. Give ourselves time to prepare, to let the town adjust, to do this right. Spring it is, Caleb agreed. I'll talk to Reverend Matthews tomorrow, see about arranging the ceremony. You think he will agree to marry an Apache woman and a white rancher? After the speech he gave about redemption and changing his ways? If he refuses, he'll have to explain that hypocrisy to his congregation. My guess is he'll agree, probably even make a sermon out of it about love transcending division. Nara laughed. You have become cynical about preachers, just realistic about people who claim moral authority, but if Matthews is genuine about changing, this will be his chance to prove it. As predicted, Reverend Matthews agreed immediately when Caleb approached him the next day. More than agreed, he seemed almost eager, as if the opportunity to publicly support the marriage would validate his claimed transformation. I would be honored to officiate, Matthews said. And if I may suggest, we should hold the ceremony at the church rather than privately. Let the whole community witness this union, make a statement about the kind of town redemption chooses to be. Caleb had initially planned a small ceremony at the ranch, just close friends and witnesses. But Matthew's suggestion carried weight. A public wedding would force the town to confront their acceptance or rejection explicitly. No room for comfortable ambiguity. I'll need to discuss it with Nara, Caleb said. It's her decision as much as mine. Nara, when presented with the idea, was quiet for a long time. Then she said, Yes, let it be public. Let everyone see that I am not hiding, not ashamed, not apologizing for existing or for loving you. Let them witness our joy and decide for themselves whether they can accept it. Word spread quickly once they announced the date, the second Sunday in April, when the wildflowers would be blooming and the harsh edge of winter fully past. Reactions varied predictably. Some expressed genuine happiness, others polite acceptance, a few outright hostility. But the hostility was muted now, spoken in private rather than shouted in public, as if the barn burning had established boundaries that even the most prejudiced wouldn't cross. Samuel Grant offered to host the reception at his ranch. Got more space than you do, and frankly, I'd like to make a statement too. Anyone who has a problem with this marriage will have to say it to my face on my property. That'll separate genuine objectors from cowards real quick. Sarah Chen insisted on making the wedding dress. I have fabric from China, silk my mother sent me years ago that I've been saving for something special. This qualifies. Doc Morrison offered to walk Nara down the aisle, since she had no family to perform that role. If you'll have me, that is. I know I'm a poor substitute for kin, but I'd be honored. Even old Tom Hastings contributed, offering to provide music. Used to play fiddle back in my younger days. Fingers aren't what they were, but I can still manage a wedding tune or two. The preparations became a community effort, people finding ways to contribute that ranged from practical to symbolic. The woman whose son had been in Briggs' mob brought flowers from her garden. The banker who'd always treated Caleb with professional coldness donated wine for the reception. Small gestures, each one a thread weaving Nara more firmly into Redemption's social fabric. But not everyone approved. 3 weeks before the wedding, Caleb received a visit from a delegation of townspeople led by a rancher named Cartwright, a man who'd always kept his prejudices quiet but firmly held. We're here to ask you to reconsider this marriage, Cartwright said without preamble. For the good of the community. The good of the community, Caleb repeated flatly. Explain that. You're setting a precedent that'll cause problems down the road. White men marrying Indian women, mixing the races. It breaks down the natural order of things, creates confusion about who belongs where. The only confusion I see is yours, Caleb replied, voice hard. Nara belongs here because she chooses to be here, and because the law says she can be. Who I marry is none of your concern. It becomes our concern when it affects property values and social cohesion. People are already talking about selling their land and moving elsewhere if this marriage goes through. Then let them move. Redemption will be better off without people who value their prejudices more than their neighbors. Cartwright's face reddened. You're making a mistake, Turner. One you'll regret when decent folks stop doing business with you, stop treating you like one of us. I stopped being one of you the moment I chose decency over tribalism, Caleb said, and I've never regretted it for a second. Now get off my property before I help you off. The delegation left, but their visit cast a shadow over the wedding preparations. That evening, Caleb found Nara sitting on the porch, staring at nothing, tension visible in every line of her body. You heard, he said, sitting beside her. I heard. They want you to choose between them and me. There's no choice to make. I chose you months ago, and I'll keep choosing you every day for the rest of my life. But at what cost? If you lose your business relationships, if people refuse to trade with you, if we become isolated, then we build something new, start fresh. Nara, I've spent too much of my life caring what people think, trying to maintain relationships that were based on convenience rather than genuine connection. I'm done with that. Whatever we lose by marrying, we'll gain 10 times over by building a life based on honesty and love. She leaned against him, drawing strength from his certainty. I am afraid, not of marrying you, that is the surest thing in my life, but of what it will cost you, what you will lose because of me. The only thing I'll lose is loneliness. Everything else is negotiable. They sat together as darkness fell, two people facing opposition with the quiet confidence of those who'd already survived worse and come through stronger. The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Sarah delivered the dress, an elegant combination of traditional Apache patterns worked in silk, a fusion of cultures that represented everything Nara had become. Doc Morrison gave Nara away at small rehearsal, practicing the walk and the words until they felt natural. Tom Hastings tuned his fiddle and ran through songs that blended frontier ballads with melodies that reminded Nara of her childhood. And through it all, Caleb watched Redemption's reaction carefully. Some people pulled back, their support conditional on Caleb and Nara keeping their relationship quiet. But others stepped forward, making their acceptance explicit. The shift wasn't universal, but it was real. A town choosing, however imperfectly, to be better than its worst instincts. The night before the wedding, Samuel Grant hosted a small dinner at his ranch for the wedding party and close friends. It was an intimate gathering. Grant, Morrison, Sarah, Tom, Mayor Whitfield, and a few others who'd proven themselves allies. The conversation flowed easily, laughter punctuating stories and toasts, and for a few hours Caleb forgot about opposition and just enjoyed the company of people who'd chosen to stand with them. As the evening wound down and guests began departing, Grant pulled Caleb aside. Tomorrow's going to be important, Grant said quietly. Not just for you and Nara, but for this whole territory. You're setting a precedent, showing that different people can build lives together without sacrificing who they are. That matters more than you probably realize. I just want to marry the woman I love, Sam, not trying to start a revolution. Maybe not, but sometimes revolutions start with simple acts of courage. You chose to help a wounded stranger when abandoning her would have been easier. That choice rippled out, forced people to examine their own values, created space for change that wouldn't have existed otherwise. Tomorrow, you'll make another choice, to publicly commit to a woman the world says you shouldn't love. That'll ripple out too, maybe farther than you can imagine. Caleb absorbed this, feeling the weight of unintended significance. What if it doesn't work? What if opposition hardens instead of softening? Then at least you'll know you stood for something real. That's more than most people manage in a lifetime. Grant clapped him on the shoulder. Get some rest. Tomorrow's your wedding day. Worry about changing the world later. Caleb rode back to the ranch as midnight approached, finding Nara still awake, sitting by the fireplace with one of Margaret's books open on her lap. She'd been practicing her reading every night, slowly working through simple stories with the determination she brought to everything. "How is it coming?" he asked, settling beside her. "Slowly. This word, possibility. I know it, but the spelling confuses me. It's a difficult one. Lots of silent letters that don't make sense until you've seen it written 100 times. He pointed to the page. "Try breaking it into parts. Possibility." She repeated it, then smiled. "I will know it now. Thank you." They sat quietly for a while, the fire crackling, the book forgotten. Finally, Nara spoke. "Are you nervous? About tomorrow?" "Terrified," Caleb admitted. "Not about marrying you. That's the easiest decision I've ever made. But about everything riding on it, all the eyes watching, all the judgment waiting. Then we face it together, as we have faced everything else." She closed the book and took his hand. "Tomorrow, I become your wife, and you become my husband. Nothing anyone says or thinks can change that. We will speak our vows before witnesses, yes, but the promises are between us alone." "Between us alone," Caleb repeated, and felt some of the anxiety ease. "I love you, Naravella. And I love you, Caleb Turner. Tomorrow, and all the days after." They went to bed that night holding each other, drawing strength and comfort from presence and proximity, two people on the edge of transformation who'd already survived more than most and were ready to face whatever came next. Morning arrived bright and cold, the sky a brilliant blue unmarred by clouds. Caleb woke early, nerves and excitement making sleep impossible. He dressed carefully in the suit he'd worn to the town hall meeting, cleaned and pressed now, respectable if not fancy. When he emerged from his room, he found Nara already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with coffee and that same nervous energy. "Ready?" he asked. "As I will ever be." They rode to town separately. Tradition demanded they not see each other before the ceremony, a superstition Caleb didn't believe in but honored because Nara seemed to find comfort in the ritual. He arrived at the church an hour early and found it already filling with people. Grant and Morrison stood near the altar, both dressed formally, ready to stand as witnesses. Sarah bustled around organizing flowers. Tom tuned his fiddle in the corner, fingers dancing across strings with more dexterity than his age suggested possible. And in the pews, the town gathered. Some faces were friendly, others neutral, a few openly hostile. But they came. Cartwright sat in the back row, arms crossed, expression sour but present. Hoskins fidgeted with his hat, clearly uncomfortable, but there nonetheless. Whitfield sat near the front, looking almost proud, as if this wedding validated his own choices to change. Reverend Matthews approached Caleb, dressed in his formal robes, expression serious but warm. "Big day," Matthews said. "You ready for this?" "More ready than I've been for anything in years." "Good. Because we're about to make history here, whether we intend to or not." Matthews gestured at the assembled crowd. "Half these people came to support you, the other half came to witness what they consider a spectacle. But they all came, which means they all care. That's something." The ceremony began with Tom's fiddle, a simple melody that filled the church with unexpected beauty. Then the doors opened and Nara appeared. She looked magnificent. Sarah's dress fit perfectly, the silk catching light and flowing like water, traditional Apache patterns woven throughout in silver thread. Her hair was unbound, falling in dark waves around her shoulders, adorned with small white flowers that matched the ones she carried. Doc Morrison walked beside her, pride evident in his bearing as he escorted her down the aisle. But it was Nara's expression that captured Caleb completely, radiant, fierce, unashamed, eyes locked on his with an intensity that made the rest of the room disappear. This was a woman who'd survived impossible loss, endured 3 years of running, faced down mobs and marshals and her own grief. And now she walked toward him freely, choosing this moment, this commitment, this life. When she reached the altar, Morrison placed her hand in Caleb's, then stepped back. Matthews began the ceremony, his voice carrying clearly through the packed church. "We are gathered here to witness the union of Caleb Turner and Nara Vela, two people who have chosen each other despite obstacles, opposition, and easier paths. Marriage is many things, a legal contract, a social institution, a spiritual bond. But at its core, it is a choice, a daily decision to stand with another person through whatever comes, to build something together that neither could build alone. He paused, looking at the assembled crowd. Some of you have questioned this union, wondered if it's proper, if it's right, if it threatens the natural order of things. I stand before you today to say that the only natural order is love meeting need, courage meeting crisis, two lonely people finding unexpected connection. If that threatens you, perhaps examine why someone else's joy feels like your loss. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some appreciative, others uncomfortable. Matthews ignored them and continued. Caleb, do you take Nara to be your wife? To honor her, stand with her, build a life beside her through whatever comes? I do. Caleb's voice was steady, certain, carrying to every corner of the church. Nara, do you take Caleb to be your husband? To honor him, stand with him, build a life beside him through whatever comes? I do. Nara's voice matched his in strength and certainty. Then by the authority vested in me and before these witnesses, I pronounce you husband and wife. What you have chosen to join together, let no one separate. Caleb kissed her then, and the church erupted. Applause from supporters, stony silence from objectors, but mostly a sound like collective breath released, as if the town itself had been holding tension and could finally let it go. They walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, past faces that ranged from joyful to accepting to resentful. But they walked with heads high, unbowed by opposition, sustained by the simple certainty that they'd made the right choice. Outside, the spring day felt like celebration made tangible. Warm sun, slight breeze, the smell of new grass and blooming flowers. People spilled out of the church, some congratulating them, others hanging back but not leaving. The reception would be at Grant's Ranch, but for this moment they stood on the church steps receiving well wishes and tolerating awkward silences. Then Cartwright approached. Caleb tensed, ready for confrontation, but the rancher's expression was more conflicted than hostile. That was something, Cartwright said. Can't say I agree with all of it. Can't say I understand. But you spoke your vows with conviction, and she looked at you like you hung the moon. That means something. It wasn't approval, but it was acknowledgement. A grudging recognition that their marriage was real, legitimate, deserving of at least minimal respect. Thank you, Caleb said, meaning it. Cartwright nodded once and walked away, and Caleb knew that while the man might never become an ally, he probably wouldn't be an active opponent either. It was enough. The reception at Grant's Ranch was everything a wedding celebration should be. Food, music, dancing, laughter, toasts that ranged from sentimental to humorous. Tom played his fiddle while couples danced on the makeshift floor Grant had set up in his barn. Sarah's food disappeared quickly, replaced by more brought by guests. Children ran through the crowd, chasing each other with the oblivious joy of those too young to understand the significance of what they were witnessing. As evening fell and lanterns were lit, Caleb and Nara found themselves briefly alone, standing at the edge of the celebration looking back at the gathered crowd. We did it, Nara said quietly. We married, despite everything trying to prevent it. We did more than that. We showed them what's possible when people choose courage over comfort. Caleb gestured at the celebration. Look at them. A few months ago, half these people would have supported burning us out. Now they're eating cake and dancing at our wedding. People can change, Nara. Not all of them, not easily, but enough to matter. She leaned against him, and they watched the celebration continue. Two people who'd started as strangers bound by crisis and become partners bound by choice. The months that followed the wedding brought a settling, a sense of permanence Caleb hadn't felt since Margaret's death. He and Nara fell into rhythms, morning chores done together, evenings spent reading by the fire, Sundays visiting town where people greeted them with varying degrees of warmth but consistent acknowledgement. They weren't outsiders anymore. Not exactly, but they'd never be fully assimilated either. They existed in a third category, accepted by those willing to accept, tolerated by those who couldn't manage more, ignored by those still nursing resentment. It was imperfect, but it was workable. Spring turned to summer, and the ranch flourished. Caleb taught Nara the finer points of cattle management, and she taught him medicinal uses for plants he'd been walking past for 20 years. They worked side by side, building not just a property, but a partnership based on mutual respect and shared labor. One evening in late July, sitting on the porch, as had become their custom, Nara made an announcement that stopped Caleb's heart. I am pregnant. The words hung in the air, enormous and terrifying and wonderful. Caleb stared at her, unable to process what he'd just heard. You're certain. As certain as I can be. I have missed 2 cycles, and my body feels different in ways I remember from when I carried Izzy. Her hand went to her stomach, protective and hopeful. We are going to have a child, Caleb. Joy and fear crashed over him in equal waves. He'd wanted children with Margaret, mourned the ones they'd never had. The idea of having another chance at fatherhood felt like a gift he didn't deserve. But fear followed immediately. Nara had lost her first child to violence. The memory of that loss lived in her eyes, in the careful way she held herself, in the nightmares that still occasionally woke her gasping. How would she survive the fear of loving another child when the first had been torn away so brutally? Are you happy about this? He asked carefully. I am terrified, she admitted, terrified of loving so deeply again, of giving fate another person to take from me. But Caleb, I am also happy. This child represents everything we fought for, the right to build a life, to love without restriction, to create something new from the ashes of what was lost. If I let fear prevent me from embracing that, then everyone who tried to destroy us wins. Caleb pulled her close, feeling the future take shape in his arms. We'll protect this child with everything we have, and we won't be alone. We have allies now, people who'll stand with us. I know, but promise me something. Anything. Promise me that if something happens to me, if childbirth goes wrong, if I do not survive, you will raise our child to know who I was. Not just that I existed, but who I truly was. My strength, yes, but also my fear, my loss, my decision to keep living despite every reason to give up. Promise me our child will know the whole story. Tears burned Caleb's eyes. Nothing's going to happen to you. You're strong, and we'll have Doc Morrison here, and... Promise me, she insisted. I promise. Our child will know exactly who you are and what you've survived. I swear it. She relaxed against him, satisfied. They sat together as stars emerged, contemplating the new life growing between them and all the possibilities it represented. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through fall and into winter. Doc Morrison checked on Nara regularly, pronouncing her healthy and the baby developing normally. The town's reaction was mixed, some genuinely happy, others making comments about mixed-blood children that Caleb learned to ignore for the sake of peace. But mostly, people accepted it as they'd accepted the marriage itself, with varying degrees of grace but consistent acknowledgement. Sarah Chen brought baby clothes she'd sewn herself. Grant donated a cradle his own children had used. Even Reverend Matthews stopped by with a carved wooden cross, which Nara accepted politely, despite her complicated relationship with the faith it represented. As Nara's belly grew and winter deepened, they made plans. Caleb built a nursery in the spare room, painting walls and assembling furniture with the careful attention of someone creating something sacred. Nara prepared clothes and blankets, her hands moving with practiced efficiency, despite the years since she'd last done this work. And they talked about names, about how to raise a child between cultures, about what values to instill, and what truths to share. Difficult conversations, sometimes painful, but necessary. Our child will be both Apache and white, Nara said one evening, belonging fully to neither world but carrying both within. That will not be easy. No, Caleb agreed. But maybe that's not a weakness. Maybe being between worlds means understanding both better than those who've only known one. Or it means being rejected by both. Then we make sure our child knows that home isn't found in matching everyone else. It's found in knowing yourself and being loved for that self. We'll give them that foundation, and they'll build their own identity from there. March arrived with false spring warmth that melted snow and brought early flowers. Nara was huge now, moving carefully, uncomfortable but healthy. Doc Morrison had taken to stopping by twice a week, just checking, making sure everything remained on track. And then, 3 weeks before the expected date, Nara's water broke. It was early morning, just after dawn. Caleb was feeding the chickens when he heard her call from the house, calm but urgent. He ran, finding her in the kitchen, fluid pooling on the floor, hand pressed against her belly. It is time, she said simply. Caleb's training kicked in, the careful preparation that had preceded this moment. He got her to the bedroom, sent one of Grant's hands, who happened to be visiting, to fetch Doc Morrison, and then did what he'd learned to do, stayed calm, stayed present, and supported however he could. The labor was long. Morrison arrived within an hour and took charge with quiet competence, checking Nara's progress and pronouncing everything normal if difficult. Sarah appeared unbidden, having heard somehow, bringing supplies and moral support. Through the long hours, Nara labored with the same fierce determination she brought to everything. She didn't scream or curse, just worked with her body's rhythms, breathing through contractions, resting between them. And Caleb stayed beside her, holding her hand, offering water, being anchor and witness to the most primal human experience. As evening approached and light faded from the windows, Morrison announced she was ready to push. The final stage began, exhausting, primal, terrifying in its intensity. Nara pushed with everything she had, and Caleb felt utterly helpless, able only to offer encouragement and presence. Then, just as the last light disappeared and lanterns became necessary, a cry filled the room. "It's a girl," Morrison announced, holding up a tiny, squalling bundle. "Healthy lungs, all fingers and toes accounted for. Congratulations." He cleaned the baby quickly and placed her on Nara's chest. Caleb stared at his daughter, impossibly small, red-faced from crying, dark hair already thick on her head. She looked like Nara, he thought. The same strong features, the same fierce expression, even in newborn confusion. Nara held her daughter, tears streaming down her exhausted face, and Caleb saw joy and grief warring in her expression. Joy for this new life, grief for the daughter she'd lost who would never grow old enough to meet her sister. "What should we name her?" Caleb asked quietly. Nara looked at their daughter for a long moment, then said, "Hope. We will call her Hope because she represents everything we dared to hope for when hope seemed impossible." "Hope Turner," Caleb tested the name. "It's perfect." Morrison finished his work and pronounced both mother and child healthy. Sarah cleaned up, then quietly withdrew to give them privacy. And as full night descended, Caleb and Nara sat together with their daughter, marveling at the tiny life they'd created from love and courage. "She will have a different life than I did," Nara said quietly. "She will grow up knowing she belongs somewhere, that she has a home and parents who love her. She will not have to run or hide or fear soldiers coming in the night." "No," Caleb agreed. "She'll have challenges. Being between worlds won't be easy. But she'll have us, and she'll have a community that chose to be better than its worst instincts. That's more than either of us had at her age." Hope fussed, and Nara adjusted her, helping her find nursing. The baby latched immediately, and Nara laughed through fresh tears. "She knows what she wants already. Strong-willed, like her mother." "We're in trouble," Caleb said, but his voice was full of joy. The weeks after Hope's birth brought exhaustion and wonder in equal measure. Caleb discovered muscles he didn't know he had from carrying the baby, changing her, walking her when she fussed at night. Nara recovered slowly but steadily, her body healing while her heart expanded to hold this new love alongside the old grief. The town's reaction to Hope's birth was telling. Some people cooed over the baby with genuine affection, seeing only an innocent child rather than symbol of mixing races. Others remained uncomfortable, keeping their distance but not actively hostile. A few made comments that revealed their continued prejudice, but they were fewer now, their voices diminishing as others refused to echo them. Spring arrived in full, and with it came a surprising development. The town council, prompted by Morrison and Grant's lobbying, established new policies explicitly protecting families like Caleb and Nara's from discrimination. It wasn't perfect, enforcement would be difficult, and attitudes wouldn't change overnight, but it represented official recognition that the world was changing, and redemption could either change with it or be left behind. On a warm April afternoon, exactly 1 year after their wedding, Caleb and Nara sat on the porch with Hope between them. The baby was alert now, eyes tracking movement, tiny hands grasping at everything within reach. The new barn stood solid in the background, testament to what could be rebuilt. The land stretched out around them, home in every sense that mattered. "Do you ever regret it?" Nara asked. "Everything you gave up to be with me?" Caleb thought about the question honestly. He'd lost some business relationships, some friendships that had proven conditional. His life was more complicated now, filled with challenges he'd never faced as a solitary widower. But he'd gained so much more. He'd gained love, partnership, purpose. He'd gained a daughter who represented hope for a better future. He'd gained a community that had been forced to examine itself and chosen, however imperfectly, to grow. "I don't regret a single moment," he said. "Not the fear, not the conflict, not even the barn burning. Because all of it led here. To you, to hope, to a life that actually means something beyond just passing time until death. You're a good man, Caleb Turner. Better than I deserve. You deserve everything good the world can offer and more. You survived impossible loss and kept your capacity for love intact. That's not weakness. That's the strongest thing I've ever witnessed." They sat together as the sun moved toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Hope dozed between them, safe and warm and loved. And Caleb felt something he hadn't felt since Margaret's death: complete peace. Not the peace of isolation or resignation, but the peace of connection, of belonging, of building something that would outlast them both. The future remained uncertain. Challenges would come. Hope would grow up facing questions about identity and belonging. The town's acceptance might waver under pressure. New crises would test the fragile progress they'd made. But they'd face it together, supported by a community they'd helped transform and bound by love that had already survived worse. Nara leaned against Caleb's shoulder and he wrapped his arm around her, careful not to disturb the sleeping baby. 3 people who'd each faced death and chosen life, who'd known loss and found love, who'd been broken by the world and rebuilt themselves stronger. The story of Caleb Turner and Naravela didn't end that day on the porch. It continued through years of raising hope, through the slow transformation of redemption from a town ruled by fear to one learning acceptance, through all the small daily choices that build a life worth living. But in that moment, as the sun set over land they'd defended and a future they'd earned, the essential truth was complete. Love had won. Not easily, not perfectly, not without cost, but definitively, transformatively, permanently, and that was enough.